Soundings Audiobooks presents an unabridged recording of The Day Will Come, written by Beryl Matthews, read by Annie Aldington. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Soundings, Whitley Bay, NE26, 2JT. CD1. Chapter 1. London, Ealing, 1940. There was silence in the packed cinema as the newsreel reported on the disaster of Dunkirk. They were making it seem like a victory, as it was for the smiling faces of the rescued men. The fact that so many men had been snatched from the beaches was something to be relieved about. Grace knew that. But her Brian hadn't been one of those men. Her kind, loving husband of only a year wouldn't be coming home. He'd had such enthusiasm for life, and it tore her apart to know she would never see his ready smile again, or hear his laughter. He hadn't deserved to die like that. Clasping her hands tightly together, she looked down, unable to watch the screen any longer. It hurt too much. She shouldn't have come. But her friend had said that the distraction of watching a film would do her good. Well, Helen had forgotten about the newsreel. Someone touched her arm, and she lifted her head, relieved to see the lights were on for the interval.
Sorry about that, Grace. I didn't think they'd show that in such detail. Are you all right?
Grace grimaced.
Not really. Thank heavens that's finished. It's a bloody mess, isn't it? What do you think will happen now? Helen asked. Hitler's taken France, so are we next?
I don't believe there's any doubt about that. We're vulnerable, and we'll need breathing space to recover, but whether we get it is anyone's guess.
There's one thing in our favour, though. We are an island, so he won't be able to march across our border.
That's true, but he can fly over the channel. Helen muttered something rude as the lights dimmed and the main film began to run. With her emotions and thoughts still in turmoil with shock, what was showing on the screen didn't register with Grace. It was a relief when the film ended, and they were able to walk in the fresh air.
I'm thinking of joining the forces, Helen said, looking at Grace.
What branch of the services?
I don't mind which one. I feel I've got to do something useful. What about you?
Grace took a deep breath. I don't know. My mind is all a jumble at the moment. I can't think straight.
That's understandable.
Helen slipped her hand through her friend's arm.
I expect you want to stay in your job. My work at the library isn't important, so I could be called upon to do some kind of war work. If I act now, I might be able to choose what I will do.
I know you're right. Grace's voice trembled, and she paused to gain control of her emotions. Brian had such plans for when the war was over. We would save hard, buy a small house somewhere away from London, so our children could have open fields to run in. The war wouldn't last more than a year, he'd said confidently. Well, it didn't for him. Now those dreams are shattered, and I'm left to face whatever is to come without him.
It's a terrible disaster, and there are thousands of families suffering the same grief.
Helen gripped her friend's arm and shook it gently.
But you are strong, Grace. You'll get through this. We all will. We have to.
There is a different kind of life facing us, and come what may, we have to deal with it. As long as it isn't speaking German, Grace remarked dryly. I never could get on with that language. Helen stopped and faced her friend, a smile of relief on her face.
That sounds more like you.
That's not going to happen. We will all fight to our last breath to keep Hitler from adding this country to his conquests. Of course we will, Grace agreed. Helen's mouth was set in a stubborn line. Many had already given their lives, including her Brian, so they couldn't sit back and do nothing. So, let's assume I do leave my job. What can I do? They started walking again, and Helen said,
That's something we're both going to have to decide, and quickly. I want to do something where I can make a difference. Women can't join a fighting unit, and I'm not cut out to be a nurse or something like that. Neither am I. So let's think what we are good at. Well, you're a good secretary, and could look after a colonel. Grace laughed for the first time in days. I doubt that would happen. If I joined any of the forces, I would probably end up in a typing pool. You might be able to work as an interpreter. Your grandmother's French, and you speak the language fluently. That's a possibility, I suppose. I'll look into that. Granny's devastated by the fall of France, as you can imagine. They fell silent, lost in their own troubled thoughts. At 23, Grace was a year older than Helen, and living next door to each other, they'd been friends from toddlers. In temperament and looks, they were opposites. Grace was fair, with blue eyes, calm and unflappable by nature. Helen was dark, with brown eyes, and prone to rapid swings in emotions. Somehow, their differences had helped to forge a strong friendship. When Grace was being too cautious, Helen would urge her on, and Grace would calm her friend down when she was being too impulsive. It worked for them, and they respected each other's qualities and opinions. Let's talk about this tomorrow, after work, Grace said when they reached their homes. Good idea. See you at 7. Grace's parents were still up, and they smiled anxiously as she walked in. Did you enjoy the pictures? Her father asked. It was good, she lied, hoping they wouldn't ask her what it was about. Would you like me to make you a cup of tea? No, thanks, dear. We've just had one, her mother replied. We've been waiting up for you. Oh, you needn't have done that. We want to talk to you. Her father's expression was serious. Sit down for a moment. She knew they were upset by Brian's death and worried about her, so she sat down and waited. Her father began hesitantly. We know it's too soon to ask you this, but we are living in dangerous times and, well, what are you going to do now, Grace? Will you stay in your job with the lawyers? I would like to, of course. I've always been so happy there. Helen and I have been talking about that, and with the way things are, we feel we really should do something worthwhile, something that will make a difference. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she blinked to clear them away. Brian and all those other men must not have died for nothing. Such a terrible waste of young lives, and it's only just beginning. Her mother wiped her eyes. We're so sorry about Brian, my dear. He was a fine boy. Yes, he was. We were very fond of him. Grace is right, though. Their sacrifice mustn't be in vain. Hitler's just across the channel, and we could be next on his list to conquer. It's going to be up to each one of us to pull together if we're to survive. Grace gave her mother an anxious look. Why don't you go and stay with Aunt Sybil in Wales, Mum? It might be safer than London. Her mother looked horrified. I'm not going to run away and leave you two here. Whatever is to come, we'll face it together. It could get rough, Jean. I know that, Ted. You're doing vital work at the engineering firm, and you won't leave that. If I went away, I'd be worrying all the time about you and Grace. I'm not leaving. Ted knew his wife well enough not to keep arguing with her. Once she made her mind up, then nothing would shift her. Not even a regiment of German soldiers marching up the street. I'm going to make inquiries about the women's voluntary service in the morning. I might be able to make myself useful with them. Jean turned to her daughter and asked, What about you, dear? Lawyers are still going to be needed, so will you stay in your job? I want to, of course. The problem is, I've been there since I left college, so what else could I do? Your skill and experience as a personal secretary won't be ignored. Also, you do speak French, and that could be useful. I don't know that my French is good enough, Dad. I've heard you chatting with Helen, and it sounds pretty good to me, he remarked, smiling with affection at his beloved daughter. Why don't you go and have a talk with a recruitment officer? He might be able to suggest something that will suit you. I just don't know what to do, she told her father. Losing Brian in this terrible way has turned my world upside down. All our plans for the future have vanished. I'm angry. I'm not sure I could stay in a comfortable job and not do something to help. Helen feels the same, and we're meeting tomorrow evening to discuss our options. Don't make any hasty decisions, her mother told her. Don't forget that Mr. Meredith will be lost without you, and it might not be easy for him to find another secretary. I expect a lot of girls will be joining the forces now. I know. He's been good to me, and I wouldn't want to let him down. She yawned and stood up. That's another problem for tomorrow. There was an atmosphere at the office when Grace arrived. They all knew that her husband had been killed in France and had given her their support and understanding. The concern on her colleagues' faces showed that something else was happening. There wasn't time to ask because her boss, James Meredith, called for her the moment she arrived. She collected her notebook, went to his office and sat down, pencil poised, ready to take dictation. He didn't say anything while he studied papers on his desk, and she waited, quite used to this. James Meredith was a bright, up-and-coming lawyer who was gaining an excellent reputation. She didn't know his age, but guessed him to be no more than 30. When Grace had joined the firm of lawyers at the age of 16, she'd started in the typing pool. Her efficiency with typing, shorthand, organisation skills and French had soon been noticed. James had promoted her to be his personal secretary. She loved working with him. He pushed the papers away and sat back, a gentle smile on his face. "Good morning, Grace. How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, thank you, sir," she replied, returning his smile. He nodded. "You would make a good lawyer. You hide your feelings well." "I've had a good teacher." Laughter shone in his grey eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was meant as one." She watched him carefully. He usually set to work immediately, but that wasn't happening today. Something other than work was on his mind, which wasn't surprising with the country facing disaster and invasion. In the time she'd worked for him, she'd come to know his every mood, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that she was about to get some news she wasn't going to like. "You have shown courage since the loss of your husband." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I regret that I am about to add to your burden. As you know, I have a private pilot's license. The Air Force wants pilots urgently, so I have enlisted." Grace wasn't surprised, but it still came as a blow. A man with his abilities would be greatly needed. Being careful not to show how upset she was, she asked calmly, "When do you leave?" "As soon as I've handed over my cases to Mr. Palmer. I will need your help to clear my desk by lunchtime." "We'll manage that, sir." She pinned a smile on her face, knowing how difficult this must be for him. Everything was changing so quickly, but that was something they all had to face. The man sitting opposite her was about to turn his back on a career he had worked and studied hard for. She'd always liked and respected him. Now her heart went out to him, and the many others who were facing similar decisions. All plans for the future were being put aside. What the future held now was the cause of much speculation. "What do you think will happen now?" she asked. "Well, the Germans won't find it easy to come across the Channel, so the feeling is they will come by air first. I expect that after Dunkirk they think we're already beaten, and it won't take much to finish us off." "Then they're wrong." Grace's eyes glittered with defiance. "Many thought the war wouldn't last long, but it's going to be a long, hard struggle, isn't it?" "I'm afraid so." James gazed into space for a moment, and then turned his attention back to Grace. "Peter and Frederick are also leaving at the end of the week. The 2 senior partners will be the only lawyers here." Grace knew what this meant, without her boss putting it into words. The senior partners both had mature, faithful secretaries. No wonder there had been an air of gloom in the main office. Many of them were not going to be needed, including her. "Do I leave at the end of the day as well, sir?" "Yes. I'm sorry, Grace. This has come about suddenly, and you haven't had time to give it much thought. But do you have any idea what you're going to do?" "I would like to do something worthwhile, but if I join any of the forces, I could end up in an office doing routine jobs." "I agree." He handed her a sealed envelope. "Colonel Askew is a friend of mine. I told him about you, and he'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the War Office. Go and see him, Grace, and give him that envelope. You're not obliged to take any job he might offer, of course,
but it would be worth your while to talk to him."
"I will, sir. Thank you very much."
Grace stared at the envelope in her hands with the Colonel's name written in James Meredith's bold hand. This was so hard. She was quite overcome by his thoughtfulness in arranging this for her. "It was the least I could do. We've worked together for about 5 years now, and you've been an excellent secretary."
"Yes, we have. And I've enjoyed every day. I'll miss you and everyone here. This war is forcing change on all of us. It's inevitable."
"Sadly, that's true." James pulled the pile of paperwork towards him. "Let's deal with this lot. I need to be out of here as soon as possible." Chapter 2. It was a sad end to the day for Grace. Saying goodbye to James Meredith had been awful, and there had been tears from others who, like Grace, were no longer needed. Her life had become one heartbreak after another. Somehow she had to get through this time and move on with her life, but it was going to be so hard. Her mother always had a cup of tea waiting for her, but the welcoming smile on her face faded when she saw her daughter.
"Oh, my dear, you don't look well."
Grace didn't move. She'd held on to her emotions all day. Now the dam burst. Silent tears streamed down her face. Without a word, her mother gathered Grace in her arms and waited. When her daughter was more composed, she made her sit down.
"Sorry, Mum,"
she said, wiping the tears away.
"But it's one blow after another at the moment."
"You don't have to apologise. Now, tell me what's happened." Jean's eyes clouded with sorrow as she listened to the account of Grace's day.
"I know we've all been talking about doing something to help the war effort, but after Brian's death I was really hoping I could stay in my job. I needed the stability of familiar surroundings and people, but even that's been taken from me. That might sound selfish when so many people are suffering, but I'm lost, Mum. The foundations of the life I've built up have crumbled."
"It's upsetting to lose your job so suddenly, but it's settled one dilemma for you."
"Has it?"
"Yes. Last night you and Helen had been talking about what you should both do. Now you're free to make that decision." Grace had forgotten about the letter James Meredith had given her. She took the envelope out of her bag and stared at it, and then handed it to her mother.
"James has made an appointment for me to see Colonel Askew tomorrow and give him this letter."
"That was kind of him, and shows how much he thought of you. You are going, aren't you? It might lead to something interesting."
"I wouldn't let James down by not keeping the appointment."
Grace gave a wan smile.
"It's time to start repairing the foundations, don't you think?"
"No, it's time to make new ones, darling," her mother said gently. She'd been waiting for 2 hours. Grace glanced at the clock on the wall and stifled a sigh. The Colonel must have forgotten about the appointment. This was probably a waste of time, and she was tempted to leave. But that would be rude after all the trouble James Meredith had gone to. She owed it to him to stay. Resisting the temptation to keep looking at the clock, she studied her surroundings. There were men of various ranks and services walking through the entrance with worried expressions on their faces. This wasn't surprising, considering the perilous situation the country was now in. She saw only a few women, some in uniform and some in civilian clothes. She occupied herself by studying each person as they hurried past. What were they thinking? Did the safety of Britain rest on their shoulders? If it did, then they were carrying a heavy burden. "Mrs. Lincoln, thank you for waiting. I'm sorry, but I was in a meeting and couldn't get away." Grace, lost in her thoughts, started and leapt to her feet. The tall man standing in front of her had dark shadows of strain under his eyes and looked as if he hadn't slept for days. She knew he was a colonel because she had made sure she had studied the various ranks before coming for the appointment. But was this the man she'd come to see?
"Colonel Askew?"
He nodded. "Please, come with me." He turned and marched away so quickly that Grace had to almost run a couple of steps to catch up with him. The room he took her to was littered with papers, and maps were pinned to almost every surface of the walls. Her orderly mind longed to get her hands on this mess. "Please, sit down," he ordered, as he settled behind a large oak desk. "I've ordered refreshments. You must be hungry after that long wait.
Thank you, sir. She took the letter out of her handbag and handed it across the desk. James Meredith asked me to give you this. He slit open the envelope and began reading. She could see immediately that it was not the short introduction she'd expected it to be. There were 3 pages in James's distinctive handwriting. The Colonel read it through twice before looking up.
James thinks highly of you, Mrs. Lincoln. He stresses that you're discreet and do not gossip. Is that so?
I have never talked to anyone about the cases Mr. Meredith has been working on.
He nodded. Was your husband killed on the beaches at Dunkirk?
Grace was taken aback by this question. What on earth had that to do with an interview for a job? As much as she objected to being asked this, she had to answer him. No, sir. I understand he was killed near Dunkirk. He never made it to the beaches.
He nodded. I was there. It wasn't pleasant.
Ah, so that was why he wanted to know. She clenched her hands together, wishing he would change the subject. It tore her apart to talk about it, but she wasn't going to let him see that. I don't suppose it was, sir. He was watching her intently, and when she held his gaze without wavering, he gave that nod again. She was wishing she hadn't come.
We won't need to test your typing and shorthand skills. I can take James's word that they are excellent. Everything that goes on in this building is highly confidential. If you worked here, you would have to sign the Official Secrets Act. Would you be prepared to do that?
Yes, sir. But I would have to know what the job is before signing anything. He picked up the telephone, dialed a number, and waited.
Dan, come to my office at once. Leave what you're doing. I could have the answer to your problem.
The door opened as he put the phone down, and a young soldier wheeled in a trolley.
Refreshments for 3, as ordered, sir. Thank you, Corporal.
The soldier spun smartly round and left, leaving the door open for someone to enter.
Ah, Dan, good. This is Mrs. Grace Lincoln. She comes highly recommended. Mrs. Lincoln, this is Major Daniel Chester.
Grace had risen to her feet the moment he'd walked into the room, and, while studying him, shook hands. He appeared to be even more exhausted than the Colonel.
Sit down, Dan, before you fall down, the Colonel ordered sharply. You should have taken a couple more days' leave.
Major Chester pulled up a chair and eased himself into it, giving the Colonel a disbelieving look.
I know. There isn't time for such luxuries.
While the officers were talking, Grace poured the tea and handed round the sandwiches. Then she sat down again, taking a cheese sandwich for herself.
Thank you, Grace. The Colonel smiled for the first time. We may call you by your Christian name.
Yes, sir. This was turning out to be a strange interview, but she was now feeling a glimmer of interest in what they might be about to offer. These men were exhausted and obviously loaded with cares and responsibilities. If she could help them, then it could be a worthwhile job.
We will take a short break for lunch, Colonel Askew told them.
Major Chester eased his long legs out, grimacing slightly.
That leg still giving you trouble, Dan? It's nothing. I've been sitting too long.
Grace refilled their cups and handed round more sandwiches. The Major smiled his thanks, and she was struck by the transformation. He was a handsome man, and younger than she'd first thought. He had the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, and strands of his black hair had a tendency to fall over his forehead, even though it was cut short.
Read this.
The Colonel handed him the letter, and then turned his attention back to Grace.
Did you enjoy working for James?
Very much, sir, she replied. I was sad to have to leave.
No doubt. I tried to talk him out of becoming a pilot, but was unable to do so. His mind was made up, and he's well aware what he's letting himself in for. Good pilot, though, and men like him are badly needed.
I'm sure they are, Grace agreed. He was also an exceptional lawyer, and it couldn't have been an easy decision to turn his back on a career he studied and worked so hard for. Major Chester folded the letter and placed it on the desk. He looked at the Colonel and nodded.
Good, the Colonel said in reply to the silent agreement. Now, all we have to do is persuade Grace that you need her help. A wry smile crossed Daniel Chester's face when he turned to Grace. Would the word desperate do the trick? She couldn't help returning his smile. What would the desperate help entail? Look after me, organise the office, protect me from unnecessary interruptions, and stay by my side. Where I go, you go. In fact, be my right-hand man. The hours will be long and unpredictable. You'll get little time off, and could be away from home for long periods at a time. There was silence when he stopped speaking, and Grace had to resist the temptation to burst out laughing. As a job description, that was enough to put anyone off. She managed to keep a serious expression before she said, "When would you like me to start?" "Right now." Daniel was on his feet. "Can you do that?" "There isn't anything else I need to do today." The smile was back, and Grace decided it suited him. If she could help him get rid of that haunted look in his eyes, then it would be an achievement. In fact, if she could help any of these men, then that would give her a lot of satisfaction. Dan turned to the Colonel. "Thank you, George." "How the hell did you do that?" he asked, amusement written all over his face. "After that rundown of the job, I expected Grace to refuse." "The letter James sent you convinced me she wouldn't. And it was no good glossing over her duties. I wouldn't have been able to keep her once she found out what a tough job it was." The Colonel nodded, serious now. "Don't let her near anything confidential today. You know there is a procedure to go through first. You are breaking all the rules." "I know, and I'll see to it straight away." "And don't stay here all night. For heaven's sake, get some rest." "I will." Colonel Askew sighed wearily. "I've heard that before. I'm handing him over to you now, Grace. After what he's been through, he needs time to recover completely. Make him stop driving himself. I don't care how you do it. You're a fine one to talk, George, and stop telling my secretary what to do. Don't take any notice of him, Grace. He worries too much. Come on, I'll show you the office. That's if I can find it under all the paperwork." "I am your uncle, Dan. I'm entitled to worry." The Colonel smiled and held out his hand to Grace. "Thank you for coming and being so patient with us." "It has been interesting, sir." "Ha! That's a polite way of putting it. I'll tell James you're going to risk working for us. Good luck." Dan ushered her out of the room, and as they walked along he said, "You haven't asked what the salary is." "I don't care," she admitted honestly. "As long as I have enough to live on, then that's all I need." "Oh, I'll see you have more than that. The work you'll be doing will be highly confidential, and your background will be examined very carefully. I don't see any problem with that, though, because the letter James supplied was very detailed. I'll see everything is rushed through." He glanced down at her as he opened a door for her. "Here we are. See what you can do with this lot. There's a private washroom through that other door." Grace stood just inside the room and gazed around. There were files and rolled-up maps everywhere. On chairs, window-sills, the floor, and even some papers balanced precariously on a 3-dimensional globe. She'd never seen such a mess. "How'd you find anything?" she asked. "I don't. I only arrived yesterday and was given this room. This is how the previous occupant left it." "Why don't they make him sort it out?" "Not possible, I'm afraid." She knew at once what that meant by the tone of his voice, and didn't pursue the subject. "Then I'd better make a start." "Thanks. I'll leave you to it while I go and get you established as a member of staff, or they won't let you in tomorrow." "Before you go, do you need to keep anything here? Can I bundle it up and have it moved to a basement, or wherever they keep paperwork they no longer need?" "I'd better have a look at it first. It would be helpful if you could get it in some kind of order so I can look through it quickly. I've never had a desk job before, but I'm going to need you to steer me through the next few weeks." "I'll do that, sir. You'll soon settle in." He grimaced. "This isn't what I joined the army for, but it seems I have certain knowledge and skills they need at the moment. You'll be all right for a while?" "Yes, sir." With a nod of satisfaction he left. Grace removed her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and made straight for the 2 large filing cabinets right by the door. They would have to be moved further along, as they were causing an obstruction. They were empty, except for an old whiskey bottle and 2 glasses. At least she didn't have to clear them out. She opened the door and looked into the corridor. A sergeant, who appeared to be strong enough to move heavy objects, was walking by. She called to him, smiling brightly. "I'm sorry to bother you, Sergeant, but could you move 2 cabinets for me?" "Certainly. Where would you like them?" The job was done in no time at all, and she set to work. It was nearly 3 hours before the Major returned, and by that time everything was neat and in date order. The bottle was in the waste paper basket, and the glasses washed until they gleamed. When Dan walked in, he just stood there in astonishment. "What a transformation! You've worked wonders in such a short time. Everything's sorted and in the filing cabinets. Would you like a cup of tea? I've managed to scrounge a kettle and china." He grinned when he saw the tray containing a teapot, fine china, and even a plate of biscuits. "Where did you get all that?" "I explained what I needed to a nice female officer, and she arranged it for me." "Who was she?" "I don't know, sir. She happened to be walking by." "I have a feeling we're going to get along quite well," he said, as he sat behind the desk, now cleared of clutter. "I'd love a cup of tea. I've spent the last couple of hours throwing orders around, and even had to get the Colonel's help. But between us, we've managed to get you a temporary pass. The permanent one will take a few days." "Thank you, sir." Grace handed him the tea and then picked up the pass. "Is there anything else I can do for you today?" "No, thank you." He sipped his tea and laid his head against the high-backed chair. In an instant he was asleep. Grace tiptoed to the door and locked it to stop anyone disturbing him. She removed her shoes and moved around quietly to finish some more jobs. She would stay until he woke up. Chapter 3. "I'm wasting my breath telling you to take it easy, aren't I?" The Colonel marched in, and then stopped in astonishment. "My word, what a difference! Did that young girl do all this today?" Dan nodded. "And without any help from me? I'm impressed." George sat down. "I only saw her because James pleaded with me to find her a job here. I'd only intended to tell her I would see what I could do and leave it at that. There was something about her, though, and after reading James's letter I thought of you. You need help, and it looks as if she might be as efficient as James said." "Quite possible, but only time will tell." Dan stood up and gazed out of the window and then turned sharply. "What the blazes am I doing here, Uncle? Was this also your doing?" "As a matter of fact, it wasn't. You were called on for your knowledge of France and Germany, and for your experience of being in the front line. Don't fight against it. You're not fit for active duty. As soon as I am, I'm out of here. I'm not spending this war sitting on my backside listening to a load of bureaucrats who don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's harsh, and not true about everyone. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. What I'm trying to say is that we've got to learn from the past and do things differently. The old ways and battle strategies won't work now." "I agree, and that's why you're here. We've got to change our ideas, and fast. We've both got battle experience and can hopefully be of some help." George stood up. "Come on, I'll buy you a pint." The pub was crowded, but they managed to find a quiet corner in the saloon bar. "Are you still having nightmares?" George asked, once settled with pints in front of them. "Not as bad, or so often. They will eventually go, I suppose. Time heals everything, they say. I've read the report of your experiences, of course, but you've never talked about it. It might help if you did." Dan drank half of the pint in one go, put the glass down, and then said, "Our orders were to secure a certain village, and the intelligence we received was way off. We walked into an ambush. There were a dozen of us. 5 of us were captured. They were a nasty lot. They didn't want to stop their advance and be bothered with prisoners. They lined us up, and I knew what they were going to do. There was a forest area nearby, but an open field to cross before reaching it. I figured there was nothing to lose, so I sent a message along the line to make a run for it, and we took off. We heard machine gun fire, then rifles, as a couple of Germans chased after us. I took a bullet in the leg, but it wasn't enough to stop me. Fortunately, they didn't continue the pursuit. Too eager to push on, I expect. We hid in the forest for a couple of hours, and one of the men bound my leg to stop the bleeding. We made our way to the coast and ended up at Dunkirk. Well, you know what that was like. You were there. George nodded. And you don't know what happened to the other prisoners? We didn't stop to look. The corporal who came with us was upset and convinced his comrades had been shot. I don't know for sure, though. You saved your men by your quick thinking. It was up to the others to follow you or stay. Only one did. It was their choice, Dan. You couldn't have done more. Maybe. But it still haunts me. There should have been something I could have done. At least you all got back safely. I made damn sure they did. We had spent days together, walking when it was safe and hiding when necessary. A journey like that didn't do your leg any good. Dan drained his glass. They could have travelled faster by themselves. I tried and ordered them to leave me, but they refused. Good men, yes. I was relieved to get them on one of those boats. When I arrived back, I stayed dockside, praying you were on one of them. I didn't recognise you at first. You looked in bad shape. I didn't know how you were still standing. You didn't look too good yourself. True, but we both made it, which is more than many other poor devils. Like Grace Lincoln's husband. That girl is wise beyond her years. Do you know what she did today? The Colonel shook his head, relieved he'd been able to get his nephew talking about his experiences. When I finally got back to the office, she made me a cup of tea, and I fell asleep. It was about 7 when I woke up, and she was still there. I had been having a bad dream again, and the sweat was pouring off me. Without commenting, she poured me a small brandy and waited while I drank it. Then she calmly washed up the glass and asked if there was anything else she could do for me before she left. I said that would be all for today. I asked her where on earth she'd got the small bottle of brandy from. She smiled and said a sergeant had got it for her. Dan laughed. She's very enterprising. We must thank James for sending her to us when we see him. He loves flying, but I wish he hadn't enlisted as a pilot. I hope he's going to be all right. I hope we're all going to survive this war, the Colonel added. Amen to that. Dan stood up. Want another pint? Might as well. By the time Grace and Helen got together that evening, it was too late to go anywhere. It was a pleasant evening, though, so they decided to head for a nearby park. There were quite a few people around, but they managed to find a seat to themselves. You were late arriving home, Grace. I'm itching to know what you've been doing. I've had a very odd day, she said, shaking her head. Helen laughed. So have I. Tell me about yours first. Well, I kept the appointment James Meredith made for me with the Colonel Askew. It turned out that James is his godson, and the Major I met is the Colonel's nephew. I can tell you that at one point I was wishing I hadn't gone to the meeting. You obviously changed your mind. Go on, I'm intrigued. Grace then gave her friend a detailed account of her day. My word, Helen exclaimed. What have you let yourself in for? I haven't the faintest idea, but I couldn't turn Major Chester down. The man is not fit and needs help. And they were both at Dunkirk? That too. Grace sighed sadly. Anyway, I'm committed now. I just hope I've done the right thing. Now, how did you get on? I went to a recruitment place in the morning to see what my options were if I joined one of the services. The officer I saw seemed to want my life history, and I couldn't see what most of the things he asked me had to do with joining the forces. Then he suddenly switched to French. I was surprised, but it didn't faze me. You know, I'm used to speaking both languages.
I thought they'd pick up on that, Grace said. What happened then? We chatted for a while, and then he stood up and marched out the room. I was perplexed and was wondering if I should leave when he returned with the corporal. He said this was his driver, and he would take me to see someone else. When I asked where we were going, he merely said it was only a short distance. How odd. It certainly was. And it got even more peculiar. The driver never said a word to me, and when we stopped, he held open the car door and told me to follow him. We went inside, and he said something to the receptionist, who told me to take a seat, and someone would come for me in a moment. Where were you? Same as you, the War Office. Anyway, a soldier soon came for me, and I was taken to a room and left there. Helen laughed. I was beginning to feel like a criminal under arrest. I was considering making a run for it when a major came in. The question started again, but in French all the time. We had tea and biscuits, and it was all very friendly. He asked me if I spoke any other languages, and when I said no, he smiled and told me I would soon learn if necessary. I was there for about 2 hours, and he finally told me not to join any of the services or take on any other kind of work. I would hear from them soon with instructions of where to go. When I asked what the job would be, he just smiled again and said it would all be explained later. My fluency with French was greatly needed. What are you going to do? Helen shrugged. Wait and see what happens. I had the feeling I was being given orders which had to be obeyed. Well, Grace said, shaking her head, we have both taken on jobs without knowing what on earth they entail. Looks that way. Sleep was elusive, and after tossing and turning for ages, Grace got up, walked over to the window and gazed out. How strange it was without street lighting. The blackout was strictly enforced, with wardens checking constantly. The events of the day were churning through her mind, making rest impossible. She had agreed to work for Major Chester without knowing what her duties would be. That had been silly and impulsive, going completely against her normal character. She never made hasty decisions. Brian had had to wait some time before she finally agreed to marry him. Her sigh was ragged as the pain of loss lanced through her again. Everyone told her it would get easier with time. At the moment, that was hard to believe. She constantly told herself there were so many feeling like this, but that only made the sadness more intense. One of those suffering was clearly Daniel Chester. He'd been injured in France, but something else had happened, and it was tormenting him. She'd watched him sleeping, peacefully at first, and then the dreams came. It had appeared to be a mixture of anger, regret, and deep sorrow, but, she suspected, mostly anger. That was probably why he resented being taken off active duty. If her instincts were correct, he wanted revenge. What a mess everything was. He'd said he needed looking after, and seeing his troubles, she knew that was true. Well, that was what she'd been trained for. Grace got back into bed. Her day had been peculiar enough, but what about Helen? After 2 long interviews, they told her to wait, saying only that they would be in touch. There hadn't been the slightest indication what they wanted her for. It was all very worrying. Stop this, she told herself sternly. The only thing either of them could do was take each day as it came and see what happened. Sleep was needed if she was going to cope with tomorrow. Chapter 4.
Can I help you, sir?
Dan tore his gaze away from the assault course and turned his head.
You're about early, Sergeant. Dickens, I saw you arrive and head this way, sir. I hadn't seen you before, so I followed to see if you needed any help. I'm the drill sergeant.
I was stationed here and did my training on this course.
I see, sir.
The sergeant studied the tall man beside him.
I see you're wearing fatigues. Were you thinking of having a go at it again?
That was my idea. It's changed since I was last here. Can you take me over it?
How bad is the injury to your leg, sir? You were limping as you walked here.
Very observant of you. It isn't much, and it's healed now.
I'm sure it is, but this is a tough course now, sir, and I wouldn't advise you dashing over it before you have the medical officer take a look at you.
Dan turned back to the course
and swore fluently under his breath. The man was talking sense, of course. But he wanted to return to active duty so bad it hurt. "Can I have your name, sir?" "Major Chester." Sergeant Dickens came to attention and saluted smartly. "I've heard of you, Major. A corporal, Bob Higgins, came through here and said your quick thinking had saved his life in France." "Is he still here?" "He was moved to another regiment last week. How can I help you, sir?" "I need to get fit for active duty again." "Understood. You're going to do more harm than good if you don't go about it in the right way. Come with me and see the MO. If your leg is strong enough, I'll personally see you get fit again. I'll arrange your training sessions to suit you. It will have to be about this time in the mornings. I'm an early riser. I can take you to the MO immediately, sir." "I appreciate your help, Sergeant." Dan smiled when he saw the medical officer. "Hello, Steve. You still here?" The officer spun round. "Dan, it's good to see you. Are you stationed here again?" "I'm afraid not. Sergeant Dickens caught me about to have a go at the assault course and insisted I come and see you first." The MO raised his hands in exasperation. "I heard about your exploits in France. You were badly injured, Dan. Good Lord, you haven't changed, have you?" He turned to the sergeant, who was watching with interest. "He would never expect his men to do anything he couldn't do himself." "So I've heard, sir. I've promised to help the Major get fit again, but I need you to have a look at him. Once I have your assessment of his condition, I'll be able to work out a programme of exercises." "You've taken on quite a task, Sergeant. I know Major Chester, and he's as stubborn as a mule." "Don't exaggerate, Steve. Are you going to examine me, or shall I take my chance and have a go at the course?" "You do that, and you'll put yourself back in the hospital." Dan began to unbutton his shirt. "Get on with it, Doc. They've given me a bloody desk job, and I'm not going to put up with that." "They've stuck you behind a desk?" Steve burst out laughing. "Good grief, man. Don't they know your reputation? Where is this desk?" "The War Office." "Oh, my." Steve was doubled over with laughter. "That's priceless. Have you been to any meetings yet?" Dan smirked. "I've got my first one today. They're under the impression that I'll be useful." "Well, I'm sure you will be, after you've banged a few heads together." Steve managed to control his amusement. "Get stripped off. Let's hope you're strong enough for Sergeant Dickens to work you to exhaustion. The people at the War Office don't know what's about to hit them." "The Colonel will be there as well." Both men looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Oh, I would love to be a fly on the wall." The MO shook his head, instantly serious, as he began his examination. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Dan walked into the office. "Good morning, Grace." "Good morning, sir." He looked different today, more relaxed and almost buoyant, she thought, as soon as she saw him. The irritation of the day before had disappeared. Perhaps he had slept well for a change. She handed him the Morning Post. "I didn't open anything in case it was something I shouldn't see." He nodded and eased himself into the chair. Ignoring the letters, he picked up a folder from his desk, read the contents, and then passed them over to her. "Sign those." Grace controlled a smile. That was an order, not a request. But she would have to get used to that. She was working for an army officer now, not James Meredith. Sadness for all she had lost over the last few weeks tried to engulf her, but she pushed it away ruthlessly. This was no time for self-pity. She sat down and began to read through the forms. "Sign them. You don't have to read every word." The irritation was back. "Yes, I do, sir. Mr. Meredith taught me not to sign anything without reading every word, including the small print." James was always meticulous. That's what made him a good lawyer. And a safe pilot. "I pray he stays safe." She looked down so he couldn't see the distress in her eyes, but he was very observant. "You don't want to be here, do you?" he said gently. She looked up then. "Do any of us, sir?" Without answering, he stood up and flexed his leg, before walking over to the window. "I haven't any choice. Orders have to be obeyed, but you were under no such constraints. Why did you take this job? I want an honest reply, Grace.
I came only because James had arranged the interview for me, and I stayed because you needed help.
Dan studied her intently. As simple as that?
She nodded. I made my decision, and it might not have been the right one, but I'll work hard and faithfully for you.
I don't doubt that. And just so we understand each other, I'll be straight with you. The job might not last long because I intend to return to my regiment at the earliest opportunity.
I'm aware of that, but all any of us can do is to take each day as it comes. We don't know what's going to happen. Hitler's only the other side of the channel, so that is all we can do. My mother always tells us not to try and cross our bridges before we get to them.
Grace smiled.
She has a saying for everything.
Sound advice, and something I should try to keep in mind. He smiled dryly. All right, Grace, let's deal with this day and let tomorrow take care of itself, shall we?
An excellent idea, sir.
She handed him the signed documents. He checked they were correct, and then said, Put the kettle on while I take these to the appropriate department. I won't be long. It only took him 5 minutes. Do you have any biscuits? He asked, the moment he walked back in the room. I'm ravenous.
Yes, I got some from the catering manager this morning.
She poured the tea and piled a plate with biscuits.
Didn't you have any breakfast?
He nodded, munching away. That was a long time ago. The door opened, and the Colonel swept in. Ah, good. I'm just in time. Grace poured another cup of tea for the officer. He smiled at her, sat down and took a biscuit from the plate. Thanks. Dan, I popped in to see if you're ready for that meeting this afternoon. We'd better decide on our strategy. I know mine already. I'm going to speak my mind. Well, so am I. But let's try not to lose our tempers, eh? Don't worry, Uncle. I won't say a word out of place. The Colonel studied his nephew with suspicion. What have you been up to? Dan laughed softly, winked at Grace, and held out his cup for a refill. She refilled all their cups and put the kettle on to make a fresh pot. This job had been taken in haste, without proper thought, and she'd been very doubtful about it. But she was beginning to like these two men. They were both strong, determined, and fighters. Just the kind this country would need in the months or years to come. Grace has signed all the necessary papers now, so I'm bringing her to the meeting. They'll have their own recorder and might not allow her to stay, the Colonel pointed out. Dan raised his eyebrows. Then I don't stay. I thought you weren't going to make trouble, George. I didn't ask to come here. If I'm to be of any help... I know. George held up his hand to stop Dan. They'll take you as you are. A man who knows what he's talking about and a bloody fine soldier. But you're a maverick. How on earth did you manage to get a promotion? Dan shrugged. Don't ask me. I didn't ask for that either. No, you didn't have to. You're a natural leader of men, and I expect that's what they recognised. Well, I haven't got any bloody men to lead now, have I? You will have again before this damned war is over. The Colonel turned to Grace. Excuse the language. Will you be embarrassed if there is an argument about you being at the meeting?
Not at all, sir. I'm Major Chester's personal secretary. If he wants me to take notes at this meeting, then that's what I'll do.
Right. I'll want a copy as well, Dan. They'll probably want an account of what happened in France, and how a disaster like that can be avoided in the future. Grace listened to the two officers, making a mental note of what they were saying. Her Brian had been out there, and in a way, it was comforting to know what he'd had to go through. She had no doubt that he'd been as courageous as the two men with her. One thing was certain, though. This job wasn't going to be dull. End of CD 1. CD 2. Time for the meeting arrived, and Grace walked into the conference room. It was dominated by a huge table, and seated around it were some 20 men, she quickly assessed. Some were in civilian suits, but the majority were high-ranking officers, representing all the services. The colonel and the major appeared to know quite a few of them, and Grace stood slightly behind them while they were introduced to everyone else. "Please take your seats, gentlemen," the man at the head of the table said. "We are pleased you have been able to join us. Your experiences in the field will be a great help." The colonel sat down while Dan found Grace a chair in the corner of the room. "Major Chester, the young lady will not be allowed to stay." "Mrs. Lincoln is my personal aide who has full clearance to handle secret information. She'll be making notes for my future reference." He then walked calmly to his place at the table. Grace stayed where she was, aware that every eye in the room was focused on her. She flipped open her notebook and waited, pen poised. No more was said, and as the meeting began, she was impressed. He had won that round without even raising his voice. From then on, the meeting took her whole concentration. Her instructions were to make a note of only the relevant points and to cut out all the unnecessary chatter and arguments. Some of the things she'd heard shocked her, as the full import of the perilous situation the country was in became clear. Not only had precious men been lost at Dunkirk, but a huge amount of military equipment had been left behind. There was now a desperate need to rebuild and re-equip the army, as well as building up defences against anticipated attack. After 2 hours, the chairman said, "That will be all for this meeting. Thank you all for your contributions. There is no doubt that we need time. But will we be given the necessary breathing space? That is something we don't know, so we must act quickly." Grace remained where she was while the men began to file out of the room. "Major Chester," the chairman stopped him. "You were an asset today. Your suggestions were sound, based on first-hand experience. I would like to have a copy of the notes when your aide has them ready." "You shall have them, sir." The chairman nodded, and then smiled. "By the way, it would be more appropriate if your secretary was in uniform." Grace followed the major out, wondering what he would say about that last remark. But he said nothing, and the subject wasn't mentioned for the rest of the day. Chapter 5. "How did your day go?" Helen asked Grace when they met that evening. "It wasn't any different from working for the lawyers. I sat in on a meeting, took notes and then typed them up. I made tea, ran errands and looked after the major." "What's he like?" "I haven't quite worked him out yet. He's a complicated man." "I don't suppose you've heard anything yet, have you?" she asked, changing the subject. "No, I'll give them a couple of weeks. If I haven't received a letter by then, I think I'll join up." "Which one of the services do you fancy?" "I don't mind. I'll go and have a talk to the recruitment officer again. Wish we could join up together, but I suppose you're stuck with that job." Grace nodded. "I couldn't walk out now, especially after all the trouble James took to get me in at the War Office." "No, of course not." Helen sighed. "We were always so sure of the direction our lives would take, but suddenly everything's been thrown into confusion. Oh well, there isn't anything we can do about it tonight." "What do you want to do? Go to the pictures?" "Not really. I've had quite a hectic day. How about coming to my room? We can play records, chat and relax." "Perfect." The colonel finished reading the notes of the meeting, and then looked at Dan. "She's good, isn't she? No wonder James thought so highly of her. It's more than that. I have the feeling he sent her to us to take care of. Is he in love with her?" "No, he's been going steady with Janet for a couple of years now. But he's been working with Grace for some time, and he probably feels protective towards her. And he wouldn't have sent anyone to us if they weren't efficient." "True. She's got a calm, quiet air about her, and isn't easily frightened. Did you notice that she didn't appear at all perturbed when the chairman said she couldn't stay?" Dan laughed softly. Her expression was composed when she flipped open her notebook. Without saying a word, she'd made it clear to everyone in the room that she was staying. "I did, and so did everyone else." "I believe that was why there was no further argument." George finished his drink and put the glass on Dan's desk. She's still suffering from the death of her husband. It shows in her eyes in unguarded moments. But under that calm exterior, there's a fighter. I've noticed. The chairman suggested it would be more appropriate to have her with me if she was in uniform. I don't know why he suggested that. There are plenty of civilians here. And if she joins one of the services, we would never see her again. James would be furious with us. Almost certainly. He can really let rip when he feels the need. George pursed his lips. There might be a way to get her into uniform without losing her. How? The organisation called the Fanny, the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, have a women's transport service. With your injuries, you could claim the need for a driver. Dan thought the idea over, and then shook his head. Grace would have to volunteer for the Fanny, and I'm sure she would if we asked her to. She would have to go away for training, though, and there's always the risk she wouldn't be assigned back here. That is always possible, of course. I could ask James what he thought about the idea. We can make all sorts of plans, of course, but the final decision will be up to Grace. If we start trying to arrange her life for her, she would have every right to tell us what to do with the job, and I've no doubt she would do just that. She can walk out of here any time she wants to. He looked at his nephew with an amused glint in his eyes. James wasn't too pleased when I told him she was working for you. Oh? Why? Dan asked innocently. He said you were too volatile for Grace. Volatile? Where on earth did he get that idea from? I wonder. They both burst into laughter. You two are trying to make me into some kind of monster. You can tell James that I've calmed down since we were children. No, don't bother. I'll tell him myself. You've learnt a few lessons since you were young boys, but your strong character can still overwhelm some people. There is also an added edge to you since your experiences in France. You're angry, Dan. You must deal with that or it will cloud your judgment. Of course I'm angry, George. I lost too many of my men out there, and that doesn't sit well with me. I've got to get back on active duty again. I'm wasting my time here. I know how you feel, but you need the breathing space to regain your full health and strength. You're still mentally fighting the enemy, so sort yourself out and quickly. We've got a hard struggle ahead of us, and we need men like you in the field. Dan's expression became serious. We're also going to need good pilots in the near future, if my hunch is right. I wish James hadn't joined the RAF. I hope he's going to be all right. Grace told me her mother is always saying that we should take each day as it comes and not try to cross our bridges until we get to them. It's hard to do that. I don't know how to stand on the sidelines and see what happens. None of us know exactly what Hitler's going to do. There's no doubt that he will be making plans to invade. When and how, we don't know yet. All we can do is strengthen our defences and wait for him to make his move. My role here is purely advisory, so I'm going to need to be kept busy. I found a friendly sergeant who's going to knock me into shape. Did you know Steve Edwards is still MO at Borden? No, I didn't. You've been down there then? Dan nodded. I was having a look at the assault course. Just looking. There wasn't anyone around and I was tempted to have a go. Sergeant Dickens arrived and suggested I see the MO first. So, how fit are you? Quite good. With the sergeant's help, I'll be out of here in 3 months. I'll be going down to Hampshire 3 times a week, so I'll take Grace with me. I've arranged for her to have driving lessons while I'm working out. A slow smile spread across Dan's face. I thought she might also like to have a go at the assault course with me. Don't you dare! Teaching her to drive's good, but you leave it at that. You know that's the wrong thing to say to me, Uncle. The sooner you get back to your regiment, the better, Dan. You're a menace with time on your hands. George stood up. Come on, you can buy me a drink. Major Chester was already in the office when Grace arrived at 8 o'clock the next day. Ah, good, you're early. He glanced down at her shoes. Can you walk over rough ground in those? Yes, sir. They've only got a low heel and are very comfortable. Come on then. We're going out for the day. Bring your pad. We will need a record. The car was waiting outside. and she got into the passenger door Dan was holding open. He slipped into the driver's seat, and Grace was surprised. Considering he had an injury to his leg, she'd expected him to have an official driver. He hadn't said where they were going, and she didn't ask. The Major would tell her when he was ready. She relaxed and watched the passing scenery. They were heading out of London, but as the signposts had been removed in case of invasion, she had no idea where they were heading. They had been driving for over an hour before he spoke. "We'll soon be at Dover. I'll tell you when I want something recorded." "Yes, sir." He glanced sideways at her. "It will be a long and busy day. When we get back to the office, I will need the notes typed up today." "Understood, sir. My parents know this isn't a 9-to-5 job." "Ah, there's the sea!" she exclaimed. He stopped the car so she could have a look at the view. She tried to imagine it crowded with landing craft. "German losses will be enormous if they try to cross the channel." Dan nodded. "That's why I believe they will have to knock out our air force and defences first. But we've got to be prepared for anything. If they had invaded soon after Dunkirk, they would have had a better chance. For some reason, Hitler didn't do that. He's given us time to rally ourselves after our losses, and that was a big mistake on his part. Now, we must get on. Do you see that castle over there?" Grace nodded. "That's where we're going." Over the next week, Grace was busy until late in the evenings. By the time she arrived home, it was too late to see Helen, and all she wanted to do was have a bath and fall into bed. Major Chester attacked the inspection tour he was on as if he was going into battle. He was a powerhouse, never flagging, even though his limp was more pronounced by the end of the day. Grace took to wearing skirts with plenty of room in them and flat shoes. She was determined to stay with him, no matter what the conditions were, and some were pretty rugged. He never had to wait for her as he strode around. She made sure she was always just a step behind him on his right-hand side. After the first 2 days, he didn't even bother to look round, but gave his instructions knowing she was there. After a week, she was fitter than she'd ever been, and loved every minute of it. They would arrive back at the office around 7 every evening, dusty, often dirty and ravenous. The Major would order food, and while eating, Grace would type the notes for the day. These were then distributed to the required people. Only then was the day finished. The last day of the assignment, the Major was to act as advisor and observer for the local defence volunteers' manoeuvres. Before setting out, he had made her change into ATS slacks and jacket. It turned out to be a wise move. They had tramped through fields, muddy from overnight rain, hid in barns, and even jumped into a ditch to keep out of sight. It was the most fun she'd ever had. They were given strange looks when they arrived back at the War Office that evening. "Good Lord," George exclaimed when he met them heading for the office. "What have you two been up to? You're covered in mud." Grace laughed. "We've been on manoeuvres with the local defence volunteers, sir." "Really, Dan, couldn't you have found Grace a nice clean observation post?" Dan looked at her, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Would you have preferred that?" "Oh, no, sir. I couldn't have done my job. And I enjoyed it. In fact, I've loved the whole trip." "There you are, George. We've had a great time." George eyed them up and down again and shook his head. "I give up. Just wait until I tell James what you're making his secretary do. And he thought she would be safe with us." He began to walk away, calling over his shoulder, "He wants her back when this blasted war is over, in one piece." They were both laughing as they reached their office. "Put the kettle on, Grace, while I order in some sandwiches. It's going to be a very late night, I'm afraid." The report was long and detailed. As each page was finished, Dan checked through it, making changes here and there, and handing it back to Grace for retyping. When the final draft was accepted, she prepared the documents for distribution. "I don't know how I would have managed without you this week." He stretched out his long legs and relaxed. "I would have had to make my own notes and then found someone to type them for me. You've done an excellent job." "Thank you." "I've enjoyed the challenge, sir." "I do believe you have. It's very late, so I'll drive you home. Do you want to change first?" She looked down at the filthy fatigue she was wearing and shook her head. I'm too dirty to put on clean clothes. I'll stay as I am and wash these before returning them to you. Keep them, he grinned. They suit you, and so does the mud. You might need them again anyway. Come on, let's get you home. The moment the car stopped outside her house, her father appeared holding a dimmed torch. Dan was immediately out of the car and holding the door open for Grace. I apologise for keeping your daughter so late, sir. No need to apologise. Grace's father peered at the tall man. Are you Major Chester? Yes, sir. Ah, it's good to meet you. Come in for a moment and have a drink with us. My wife would like to meet you. That's kind of you, but I haven't cleaned up after a day tramping through fields. Don't worry about that. You look fine. Dan laughed. How can you tell, sir? It's dark out here. Jean called from the door. Tell them to come in, Ted. I've saved dinner and there's enough for two. Grace knew her parents were very curious about the officer she was working for, but the Major probably didn't feel like being sociable after the week he'd had, especially at this time of night. I'm sorry, sir, she whispered. They're itching to meet you. I'll tell them you have another appointment. He touched her arm, and she could just make out a slight shake of his head. Well, if you don't mind me trailing mud through your house, then I would enjoy a home-cooked meal for a change. We've been surviving on sandwiches. Good, good. In you come, then. Ted ushered them straight into the kitchen, where Jean was already busy at the stove. She turned and smiled as soon as they walked in, and shook hands with Dan. It's good to meet you, Major Chester. I'm Jean, and my husband's Ted. Do sit down. It's only stew and dumplings, but it's tasty and filling. It smells delicious, and please, call me Dan. Grace watched her parents carefully. They gave no indication that they'd noticed their dishevelled state. Hope you don't mind eating in the kitchen, Jean said, as she put large plates of piping hot stew in front of them. There, you tuck into that. Would you like a beer to go with that, Dan? Ted asked. I would, thank you. The stew was delicious, and the dumplings light and fluffy. Grace hadn't realised how hungry she was. Dan obviously felt the same, because he had 2 large helpings. That's the best meal I've had in ages, Jean. Oh, thank you very much. I'm pleased you enjoyed it after your busy day. She smiled at her daughter. I know Grace is always ready for a dinner in the evenings. You look very nice in that outfit, darling. It suits her, doesn't it, Dan? Grace nearly choked on a mouthful of tea, and she could sense Dan trying to control his laughter. Her mother had no intention of giving up, though. She was such a tomboy as a child, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. Helen, her friend, was the same, but they had to smarten up when they started work. Oh, I nearly forgot, her father said, before Dan could answer. Helen left a message for you, Grace. She said to tell you that she's had the letter she was waiting for, and she has an appointment tomorrow at the War Office. Did she say what time and who with? 10 o'clock with a Mr. Graham, I believe. Grace frowned and looked at Dan. I haven't heard of anyone by that name. Have you? Not that I can recall. I expect they're interested in her fluent French, her mother said. They probably want her to be an interpreter or something. Most likely. I'll try and catch her when she arrives. Is your friend French? Dan asked. Her grandmother is. They speak French nearly all the time. Grace talks to Helen in that language sometimes, Jean told Dan proudly. They chatter away and no one can understand what they're saying. They were little devils as children. Grace speaks German as well, her father added. Oh, Dad, I'm not very good. I wouldn't know, dear. It's all foreign to me, Jean said, and chuckled when they all laughed at the joke. Dan stood up. I must be on my way. Thank you for your hospitality and an excellent meal, Jean. When Grace returned to the kitchen after seeing Dan out, her mother was smiling happily. What a charming boy. Such lovely manners. Boy? Mum, that's a full-grown, tough man. Anyone from 30 down is a boy to us, dear. Remember, we had you late in life, so we're getting on in years. The water's hot, so have a quick bath and get some sleep. You must be tired out. Leave those clothes out and I'll wash them for you. Grace kissed her parents good-night and went up to the bathroom. What a day it had been. Chapter 6. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Dan went along to his uncle's office, knowing he would already be there. "Morning, Dan. Finished running around, have you?" For the moment. He pulled up a chair and sat down. "Do you know a Mr. Graham who works here?" "Can't place him." "Why do you want to know?" Dan explained about Grace's friend. "Interesting." The Colonel took a large sheet of paper out of his desk drawer and studied it for a while. "This is a floor plan of all the offices and who occupies them. I can't see anyone by that name." "Perhaps he's a new arrival." "Must be." George pursed his lips. "A French grandmother, you said?" Dan nodded. "Are they recruiting interpreters?" "Well, they will always be needed, and if the girl is fluent, then she could be valuable." "See if you can find out. I'm curious. I know Grace declared French as another language when she joined us, but I found out last night that she also knows German." "Does she? How good?" "Not very, according to her." "Find out. That should be easy for you. You speak it like a native." He paused for a moment. "Is that what made you take that risky dash for the forest?" Dan's jaw tightened before answering. They were speaking quietly, but I heard enough to know they didn't want to be bothered with prisoners. They couldn't let us go, and when several of them began to line up in front of us with rifles, I told the men to run. Knowing the language got us out of a couple of tight spots as we made our way to the coast. Anyway, that's in the past. We've got to prepare for what we're going to face now. That's why I think you should find out how good Grace's German is. If it isn't fluent enough, then teach her. We all need to improve whatever skills we have. Never know when they might come in useful." "I'll do that." Dan stood up. "Let me know if you hear anything of interest." When he walked into the office, Grace was already there. "Good morning, sir," she smiled. "Thank you for being so kind to my parents." "It was my pleasure." He pulled a face when he saw the amount of envelopes she was busy opening. "That has piled up while we've been busy." "We'll soon get through it. That heap on your desk is for immediate attention." They'd been working steadily for about an hour when he suddenly gave his instructions in German. For a moment, Grace was taken by surprise. She managed to quickly bring the unused language to mind and answered, badly she was sure. If he'd spoken to her in French, she wouldn't have had to struggle so hard. He continued in that way while Grace answered hesitantly. It was soon apparent that he was very good. After a while he said, "Your accent is terrible, Grace. We'll have to do something about that." The switch back to English made her sag with relief. "I know, sir. I wasn't very good, and I haven't used it for a long time. I can read it better than speak it. You are excellent, though. Where did you learn it?" "I lived in Germany for a few years when I was 12. I went to school there, and you pick things up easily at that age. My father was in the diplomatic service. He's retired now and they live in Cornwall. We'll set aside at least an hour each day when we will speak only German." Grace was puzzled. "May I ask why, sir?" "It could be useful to you in the future." "When the Germans invade, you mean?" "Good Lord, no. The other way round, Grace." "I see." She didn't, but he was her boss, and if he wanted to speak German, then who was she to argue? She would have to get her reference books out again. She was busy typing when he interrupted her. "It's coming up to 10 o'clock. Why don't you go and see if your friend has arrived?" "Oh, thank you. I didn't realise it was that late." She stood up quickly. "I won't be long, sir." "Take all the time you need." Helen was already waiting when Grace arrived. Her friend was wearing a navy blue suit with a crisp white blouse. "You do look smart," she said, as she greeted her. "I thought I'd better wear something simple. I've no idea what this is all about. I have been told to wait until someone comes for me." "I hope you don't have to wait as long as I did. Dad said you were seeing a Mr. Graham. Is that right?" Helen nodded. "The letter didn't say what he's in charge of." "Well, you're soon going to find out. Here's your escort. Best of luck. I'll see you tonight if I'm not too late." She watched until Helen had disappeared and then hurried back to her office. "That was quick. Did you see her?" "Yes, but we didn't have time to talk much.
because they came for her almost immediately. I thought all the offices were up here, but they went down the stairs.
I expect they're using every available space. This place is getting crowded now. He smiled, put the kettle on. All this paperwork's making me thirsty. She smiled at the disgusted expression on his face.
You'd rather be tramping through muddy fields?
Definitely. We're going out tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up from your home around 5 a.m. Wear flat shoes and the slacks again. She stared at him, astonished.
5 in the morning?
You can get up that early.
Of course, but where are we going? I thought your inspection tour was over.
This is personal. That's why we have to go so early. You'll enjoy it. Bring your office clothes to change into before we come back here. There wasn't time to reply, because the phone rang. The Major listened for a moment, and then left the office.
What was he up to now, she thought? And if this trip was personal, why was he taking her with him? What a job! She never knew what was going to happen next.
Grace couldn't wait to see Helen, so she went straight to her friend's house.
What happened? She asked eagerly. Did they offer you a job?
Yes.
Helen hesitated. But I've been told I mustn't talk about it. All I can say is that I'll be working for a French section.
Oh, I understand. I'm in the same situation.
But did you accept the job?
Yes, I did.
Helen smiled broadly. It should be interesting, and Grandmother is thrilled I'll be using my French.
I'll bet she is. Grace laughed. She's thinking you'll be looking after the French soldiers who came over after Dunkirk, and could find yourself a nice husband among them. She never gives up, does she? Anyway, they asked me to volunteer for an organisation called Fanny.
What on earth is that?
The First Aid Nursing Yeomanry.
You're going to be a nurse?
Grace was horrified.
No, the name goes back to when it was formed, years ago. The women used to help the wounded soldiers, and they went everywhere on horseback. Things have changed now, and they do all kinds of jobs.
Grace was highly amused.
I can just imagine you charging around on horseback. What's the uniform like?
Khaki, and much the same as the ATS. I don't know where I'll be stationed yet, but as soon as I get an address, I shall expect a letter from you every week.
I'll write twice a week, I promise. Do you know when you'll be going?
They said within a week. We'll have a party before I leave.
Mum, I told you to stay in bed. I can get my own breakfast.
Grace had moved around quietly in order not to disturb her parents, only to find her mother busy in the kitchen. I was already awake, so I thought I'd get you something to eat before you leave. Don't you know why Dan wants you ready so early?
No.
Grace sighed. I probably won't know until we get to wherever we're going. He doesn't explain until it's necessary. Oh well, it keeps things interesting, doesn't it? He doesn't look like a man it would be easy to disobey. Grace shook her head and then sat down at the table.
You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble, Mum. Toast would have been enough.
I managed to get some extra eggs from Gladys up the road. Her chickens have been laying well. You've got a long day ahead of you, so enjoy the scrambled eggs. She did enjoy them, and by 10 minutes to 5 she was watching from the front window, knowing he would be right on time. The moment the car arrived, she picked up her bag and walked out before he had time to come up the path.
Good morning, sir, she said brightly. Looks as if it might be a dry day.
Hoping to avoid any mud today, are you? He held the car door open for her, and then got in himself, wasting no time in getting under way. She was amused by his remark, and said teasingly,
It could be my lucky day. Mum insisted on washing the clothes, and has pressed a lovely crease in the slacks.
He laughed softly. I think I can guarantee that you won't get in a mess today. Don't be too disappointed, though, because I'll almost certainly change that in a week or two.
Are we going to be leaving this early for some time, then?
Only 2 or 3 days a week. It depends how we both get on. Dan fell silent then, and Grace knew that was all she was going to be told. The journey took nearly 2 hours, and Grace had no idea where they were as they drove onto a military site. The moment they were out of the car, a sergeant marched up to them and saluted the Major. Good morning, Major Chester. Everything's ready for the young lady. Corporal Hunt is one of our best drivers. She'll be in good hands.
Grace was looking from one man to the other. What was going on? Another soldier marched up and saluted smartly.
Corporal Hunt, sir.
Dan looked down at Grace.
Off you go. The corporal is going to teach you to drive. I'll see you in about an hour.
She looked doubtfully at the enormous machines near them. A tank!
You can have a go at one of those later. But you'd better learn to drive a car first.
Dan had a perfectly straight face, but the other two soldiers were having great difficulty keeping their laughter at bay.
I see.
She looked the Major straight in the eyes. They were dancing with amusement. He was enjoying this. And for the record, sir, can I ask what you will be doing?
The sergeant is going to knock me into shape. Off you go.
As she walked away with the corporal, she whispered to the sergeant, "Good luck," and received a sly wink in reply. Now they were away from the others. The corporal was laughing openly.
Didn't the Major tell you he'd arranged driving lessons for you?
Not a word.
Is he easy to work for?
Oh, very. He's a perfect gentleman. He gives the orders and I obey them. It works well. They'd reached a car, and the corporal held open the passenger door for her. There was still a broad smile on his face as he got in the driver's side.
I'm going to take us to a practice ground and then you can take over.
Can Major Chester do this? She asked. I'm not in the forces. These clothes are borrowed.
We're both doing this in our own time, miss. He glanced at her left hand.
Call me Grace.
And I'm Bob. As I was saying, we're doing this to help the Major. He's well known here, and respected. If he wants to get fit enough to return to active duty, then we'll do what we can for him. It will also help him if you can drive.
They pulled up on some spare ground.
You sit in the driver's seat now. I'll run through the controls with you and teach you to steer in a straight line first. We have plenty of space here.
Hello, Steve, Dan said, when they found the MO waiting for them in the exercise hall.
Are you going to join me? No, I'm going to watch you don't overdo it. If I tell you to stop, you stop. Is that understood?
I'm sure Sergeant Dickens won't allow me to work too hard in the beginning. Dan rolled up his sleeves, eager to get started.
I hear you brought a pretty girl with you. I see news still travels at the speed of light here. She's my secretary, Steve. Let's get started, Sergeant, and don't take it too easy. I need to get fit, and quickly. I need this workout because I'm never going to regain my full mobility by sitting at the damn desk they've given me. It must have some compensation, Dan. Like being given a lovely girl to work with, the MO stated.
Dan glared at Steve.
She's married, Doc. Or was. Her husband was killed in France, and she's still grieving for him. I'm sure she will never want anything to do with another man in uniform. This is no time to form relationships or become too attached to someone. Oh, that's sad. She's so young. And there are far too many like her, and there are going to be many more before this mess is over. Go and sit in the corner, Steve. We're wasting time.
For the next hour, the sergeant took Dan at his word and worked him until he was wreathed in sweat and gasping for breath.
Enough! Steve came over. Damn you, Dan, I should have stopped you sooner. Let's have a look at that leg.
After a thorough examination, Steve nodded.
You don't appear to have done any damage, although that workout would have floored many men. He's very strong, sir, the sergeant said, with respect in his voice. All right, Dan, have a shower and change into uniform, and then we'll have breakfast. I've ordered it to be served in my office. You must be hungry by now.
Dan stood under the spray of hot water and closed his eyes. He was relieved. He had been able to do more than he'd thought possible. Because he had gone so long without proper medical attention, by the time he had reached England his leg was in a mess. It had been touch and go for a while, but it had healed. If he'd lost it, his army career would have been over, and that would have devastated him. Scrubbed clean and in full uniform again, he returned to the others. He smiled to himself when he saw Grace with them, looking smart and prim in her office clothes.
He was beginning to realise that she was not the docile girl she presented to them. Her parents had helped to dispel that notion. "How did she get on, Corporal?" "Very well, sir. I think she'll make a competent driver in no time at all." He nodded and asked Grace, "Did you enjoy learning to drive?"
"Yes, sir."
A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth.
"I can't wait to have a go at a tank."
They all laughed, and she joined in. It felt good to laugh again. The pain was still there, of course, but she was beginning to live with it better. Brian would have wanted her to get on with her life. "This is Steve, Grace. He's the medical officer here, and he's arranged breakfast for us." He then turned to the two soldiers waiting to be dismissed. "Thank you, Sergeant and Corporal. We've appreciated your help this morning." "Sir." Both men saluted smartly. "It's been a pleasure."
"Thank you, Bob," Grace smiled. "I enjoyed the lesson."
He bowed slightly. "I look forward to the next one. Perhaps we'll take you out on the road next time." After a quick meal with Steve, they were on their way back to London, and as they drove along, Grace studied Dan. He appeared more relaxed after his exercise session with the sergeant.
"It was kind of you to arrange driving lessons for me, sir."
She smiled when he glanced at her.
"I enjoyed it."
"It's a skill worth having. You never know when it might come in useful." "How did your friend get on with her interview?" he asked, changing the subject.
"All right, I think. She couldn't say much about it. Everything's so secret these days. But she was able to tell me they wanted to have her fluent French. And she's had to join the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. I've never heard of the Fanny before, sir, have you?"
"It's a volunteer organisation. Been established quite some time, I believe."
Grace nodded. "She'll be going away for training quite soon."
"You'll miss her."
"Yes, I will. We've been friends since we were toddlers."
Pushing the sad thought aside, Grace then settled down to watch how the Major used the pedals while he was driving. Chapter 7. It was the middle of August now, and Dan was edgy. Convoys were being continually attacked, and airfields bombed. The pilots were being pushed to their limits. But when he had seen James 2 days ago, there hadn't been the slightest doubt in his mind that they would beat the enemy air force. Every day they were fighting for their lives, and he was still stuck to this blasted desk. His sessions with the sergeant had gone well, and the fitter he became, the more he riled against the job he was now doing. According to the corporal, Grace was an excellent pupil. He had told Dan that she had a sharp mind and was quick to learn. He seldom had to explain anything twice to her. He glanced across the office where she was busy working. What was going to happen to her when he returned to his regiment? That day was fast approaching, and the problem was beginning to play on his mind. George had his own staff, so there wasn't an opportunity there, and he'd been making discreet inquiries here at the War Office, but there didn't appear to be any vacancies at the moment. He had told her at the start that the job with him probably wouldn't last for long, of course, so he shouldn't be worrying about it. But he was, and he now understood why James had been so protective towards her. She had suffered a great loss, but she had kept going with courage and determination, keeping her grief a private emotion. If only he could find some way to take her with him. She was a competent driver now, but he couldn't declare that he needed a driver when he was doing everything to prove he was fit again for active service. He could run faster than Sergeant Dickens, and the man was like a hare. He was having a final training session tomorrow and then a medical examination later in the week. They couldn't declare him unfit for duty now. He was stronger than he'd ever been. Grace was going to be given a driving test by one of the transport instructors. She'd been taught by the best, and at least he'd been able to do something for her. It had been more than generous of them all to give of their free time like this. And to show his appreciation, he was going to invite them to London for an evening at the Savoy Hotel. Grace as well, of course. She had put up with a lot from him, and she had never complained. "How do you feel about the test?" Dan asked Grace, as they headed out of London the next morning.
"Nervous," she admitted. "I hope I'm good enough, because we won't be coming here again, will we?"
"No. This is the last session for both of us." Dan cast a quick glance at her, I'm fully fit again. The sergeant has done his job well. I wouldn't have made such rapid progress without him.
They've been very kind, and I've enjoyed the challenge of learning to drive. She tried to keep her tone bright, but to be honest, she was feeling a little sad. This wasn't just the end of the early morning trips. It was more than that. He hadn't said anything, but it didn't take a genius to know that her job with him was coming to an end. The change in him was remarkable. The limp had completely disappeared, and for such a big man, his movements were now quite graceful. She smiled to herself. That seemed a silly thing to say about a man who exuded power and strength, but that was how she saw it, and that was what the medical examiners would see. There was no doubt in her mind that he would be declared fit for active duty again. Helen had settled into whatever she was doing and was happy. They wrote regular long letters to each other, but never mentioned their jobs. Everyone was continually reminded not to talk, as you never knew who was listening. Grace had been lost in thought and hadn't noticed the miles slipping away, so she was surprised when he stopped. "You drive now," Dan told her, getting out of the car and holding the door open for her. "Don't look so worried. You need practice before we get there." Now she really was nervous. This was the last thing she'd expected him to ask her to do. He adjusted the driver's seat so she could reach the pedals. It had been pushed right back to accommodate his long legs. At 5 feet 8 inches, she was by no means short, but he was over 6 feet. "That seems right," he said. "Can you reach the pedals easily?" "Yes, that feels fine, thank you." He adjusted the passenger seat and got in. "All right, Grace. You know the way by now." She drew in a deep, silent breath and started the car, concentrating hard to remember everything Bob had taught her. "Relax," he told her after a few miles. "You're doing fine." It wasn't easy with him sitting beside her and watching every move she made, but those few words of encouragement was the only comment he made. By the time she reached the camp, she was relieved and rather pleased with herself. She didn't feel as if she'd made any bad mistakes, or he would certainly have corrected her. It boded well for the test. Bob smiled with pleasure when he saw Grace getting out of the driver's side. He saluted the Major. "How did my pupil do, sir?" "Very well, Corporal. I felt quite safe." Grace gave him a disbelieving look. She'd noticed his foot pressing on an imaginary brake once or twice. He laughed softly, reading her expression accurately. "Don't change out of the slack straight after the test. There's something else I want you to do before we leave." "Very well, sir. I'll see you in about an hour." "You didn't ask Major Chester what he had planned," Bob remarked as they walked towards the car. "I quickly learnt not to ask him questions." "I know," Bob laughed. "He tells you what to do and you do it." She smiled and nodded towards another soldier waiting by the car. "Is that the man who's going to do the test?" "That's right. You don't have anything to worry about. You're a good driver. All you're lacking is experience. Just forget he's there and concentrate on the driving." "I'll try not to let you or myself down." Putting on a confident air, she walked towards the examiner. "We'll go straight to the assault course, Sergeant." "Yes, sir. I've got a few volunteers who'll give you a bit of competition. They're looking forward to beating an officer. All I've told them is that you're an officer who wants to see if he can still tackle the course. They don't know who you are." Dan grinned. "So they think they can beat me, do they? We'll see about that. I used to be quite good at this. And I'm sure you still are. Now you're fit again, sir. Let's not keep them waiting, then." There were 6 soldiers at the course, laughing and joking. They snapped to attention when Dan arrived. "At ease. Thank you for volunteering to run the assault course with me. I haven't tackled it for some time, and it will be more fun to be running with others." The men smiled smugly, and one said, "We're looking forward to it, sir. We don't get the chance to run against an officer." Dan put on a slightly worried frown as he studied the course, making the sergeant turn away to hide his grin. "Confident bunch you've gathered together, Sergeant," Dan remarked quietly. "They're new here, sir, and don't know you or your reputation of never expecting your men to do anything you can't. I can't wait to see them brought down a peg or two." "You really think I can do that?"
The sergeant nodded, hardly able to contain his amusement. Working with you over the last few weeks, I've seen for myself what you can do, and I'm sure they won't find it as easy as they think it's going to be. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Let's see just how fit I am, shall we? The sergeant faced the men. Right, let's get started. Any man I see tripping, pushing, or obstructing another will regret it. Is that clear? Yes, Sergeant, they chorused. Play fair, or I'll make your lives a misery. Get ready? Go! Dan started several paces behind the enthusiastic men, pacing himself over the first few obstacles. Then, finally feeling good, he increased his speed, overtaking one man and then another. The sergeant was running beside them, yelling comments at the top of his voice, not all of them complimentary. It was only in the last few yards Dan managed to overtake the last of the men. He was bent over, gasping for breath, when the team of soldiers gathered round, moaning with exhaustion. Well done, sir, one of them gasped. We couldn't stay with you. Dan grinned, straightening up, elated with the way it had gone. I wasn't sure I could beat you. Thanks for giving me the chance to try. Steve wandered up. That was impressive, Dan. How does the leg feel? Good. It held up well. The soldiers were now looking at the tall officer in amazement. You did that with a gammy leg? One of them asked. It's healed now. Dan turned to Steve. What do you think, Doc? Will they let me return to active duty? No doubt about it. I'll send in a report as well to make sure of it. You'll be back with your regiment by the end of the month. Your men will be relieved to see you. A cloud crossed Dan's face. I'll know some that survived, but there will be a lot of replacements I don't know. They will have all heard about the exploits of Major Chester, and they will be just as relieved to see you back. No one thought it would be possible, Dan, but you always were a stubborn bastard. One of the soldiers whispered to the others. What did he do? Dunno, another replied, but I think the sergeant has been hiding things from us. He damn well knew we were going to be beaten. All the comments stopped as Grace walked into view, accompanied by the corporal and the examiner. Ah, Dan strolled over. How did she get on, Andy? I gave her the same test as a military driver, and she passed easily. I've been trying to persuade her to join the ATS, but I haven't been successful. Dan didn't comment on that, but smiled at Grace. Well done. Thank you, sir. Her eyes shone with amusement as she looked at him. I see you've managed to find some mud. Are you jealous? He asked, and they both laughed at the private joke. As it's our last visit here, and as a celebration of you passing your test, I thought you might like to have a go at the assault course with me. Dan, Steve exclaimed, you can't ask a girl to tackle that. Why not? I'm sure she'd like to have a go. Wouldn't you? She eyed the monstrosity and thought for a moment. The glint in his eyes told her he really wanted to do this. Things had obviously gone well for him today, and she could see his relief. He knew he was on his way back to active duty, so perhaps this would be a fitting way to bring their short time together to a close, with laughter. She smiled at him. You're on. He took hold of her arm and placed her in front of the first obstacle. I'll tell you how to deal with each stage of the course. Trust me, and go for it. I won't let you hurt yourself. She nodded, wondering why on earth she'd agreed to this. Run as fast as you can. It was bedlam. Everyone there was running beside them, shouting encouragement. The first obstacle wasn't too bad, and her balance was good when she reached the pole across the water. But there was a high wall in front of her now. Keep your speed up, Dan instructed, and be ready to grab the top of the wall. When they reached it, she was lifted off her feet and thrown to the top. She made a desperate grab and held on with all her might. Suddenly, Dan was also up there with her. Right, now get your legs up. The yelling from the onlookers was deafening as Grace struggled to sit astride the wall. She looked down and saw the sergeant waiting on the other side, urging her to swing down. The rest of the course was negotiated in the same way, with willing hands helping her along and enthusiastic encouragement from all sides. By the end, she was dirty, exhausted, and probably bruised, she thought, but it had been fun, and she'd never seen Dan laughing so much. "Well done, Grace, that was a valiant effort. I'm proud of you." Everyone was clustered around, having thoroughly enjoyed the sight of a girl trying to tackle their course. She finally found enough breath to talk and said, "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done it without you and the sergeant. You both practically carried me over some obstacles." Steve waded in and took hold of Grace's arm. "All right, men, you've had your fun. You come with me, young lady. I'll see you when we've both cleaned up." As Steve led her away, he shook his head. "That was crazy, Grace." "I know, and I'm sure I'll regret it tomorrow." "You did it for Dan, didn't you?" "I couldn't refuse. He's so happy, and it felt right to finish off with some light-hearted fun. He'll be returning to his regiment soon, won't he?" "He's going for a full medical in 2 days, and there's no doubt he's now fully fit. They will have to declare him fit for active duty. Will you be transferred to another office?" "I really don't know. That's a bridge I will have to cross when I reach it." "You get on well together. It'll probably be a wrench to watch him walk away." "I expect so, but for me the last few months have consisted of one loss after another. I'm getting used to it." Her smile was tinged with sadness. "I didn't want to work for him, you know. I only went to the War Office because my boss had arranged the interview for me when he joined the Air Force. Now I'm sorry my time there has been so short." An hour later, both scrubbed clean and dressed for business. They were on their way back to London. "I've invited everyone who's helped us to an evening at the Savoy," Dan told Grace. "It's next Saturday, so get out your party dress. We'll have a celebration." Chapter 8. For the next 3 days, Dan was out of the office most of the time. Grace knew he must have taken the medical, but he hadn't mentioned it. She would have known if he hadn't passed, though, because his volatile nature would have erupted. He was sweeping around like a man with a purpose, and whatever he was doing, it was personal, because he hadn't asked for her help. The door opened, and the Colonel looked in. "Do you know where Dan is, Grace?" "No, sir. I haven't seen much of him this week." Colonel Askew shook his head. "He should let you know where he's going. Tell him I want to see him when he shows his face." "I will, sir. If he doesn't come back this afternoon, I'll leave a message for him. I'm afraid he's in and out and prowling around like a tiger." The Colonel laughed. "That's very apt. The Royal Hampshire Regiment are nicknamed the Hampshire Tigers." "Oh, well," Grace smiled. "He's in the right outfit." Now he's passed the medical. He can't wait to rejoin them. He won't suffer any delays either. He's probably out making sure his return is immediate. End of CD 2. CD 3. Now she knew, Grace thought, as the officer left. She could be out of a job after tomorrow. One thing was for sure. She wasn't going to rush into anything this time. She hadn't been thinking straight after Brian's death, but she would take time with her next move. It was late in the afternoon when Dan swept back into the office. "Make some tea, Grace. And is there anything to eat in this place?" She nodded. "I'll find you something, sir. What would you like?" "Anything." Grace soon returned with a plate of cheese sandwiches. "This was all I could get." "That's fine." He smiled as he took one from the plate. "Thanks, Grace. You're a treasure." By the time she'd made the tea, the plate was empty. "Would you like some more?" He shook his head as she handed him a cup of tea. "Colonel Askew would like to see you." "Right." Dan drank the tea and held the cup out for a refill. That disappeared just as quickly. "I'll go and see him now." He swept out of the office, and Grace watched the closing door with amusement. Tiger was indeed apt. "You wanted to see me, George?" "Oh, you've decided to pay us a visit, have you?" He studied his nephew carefully. Even as a child, Dan had been a force to be reckoned with, and since his experiences in France and Dunkirk, that quality was even more noticeable. Got what you wanted, have you? I'm off to Lower Barracks, Winchester, on Sunday. Have you told Grace? Not yet. Then you'd better do it today, Dan. If I'd known you were going to return to active duty so soon, I would have tried to find her a different position. Assigning her to you was a mistake. No, it wasn't, Dan exclaimed angrily. I told her right from the beginning that the job probably wouldn't last long. She's an intelligent girl. She understood. I've done what I could for her. She's had the very best driving instruction it's possible to get. I've also tried to find her another job here, without success. What more do you and James expect me to do? There's a bloody war on, Colonel, and I'm going back to my regiment where I belong. Dan surged to his feet, ready to storm out of the office, and stopped in mid-stride. He was looking into the face of a girl who was not at all happy about what she'd just heard. Grace was not only furious, she was hurt as well. Her gaze was icy as she looked at the two men. No one has the right to believe they can decide my future. I'm quite capable of finding my own way in life, without interference from you. How dare you presume what I should or should not do? And you're wrong, Colonel. You didn't make a mistake. I did. James should have told me you were almost family. I didn't want to keep the appointment he'd made for me, but out of loyalty to him I came. He also had no right to believe I needed looking after. I'm good at my job and will make my own decisions. Grace stepped round Dan, picked up the telephone and dialed a number. General Norton, I have Major Chester for you. She turned and thrust the phone into Dan's hand. He wants to speak with you, urgently. As Grace swept out of the office, Dan hesitated, not wanting her to leave like this, but he was trapped. With a frustrated growl, he put the phone to his ear. Chester, sir. It turned out to be a lengthy call, and by the time Dan arrived back in his office there was no sign of Grace. He swore fluently and spun round, nearly crashing into his uncle. It's no good tearing after her. I tried to catch her, but she's gone. Damn and blast. George grimaced. At least that's milder than the last lot of expletives you used. Stop fretting. Anyone would think you'd formed an attachment to the girl. You're letting your imagination run away with you, Uncle. She's been good while she's worked for me, and hasn't flinched, no matter what I've thrown at her. I don't want to leave with a bad feeling between us, that's all. Well, there isn't much we can do tonight, so leave it until tomorrow. She'll come back. She's too professional to leave without giving proper notice. Dan shook his head. You know I've never been able to leave things unresolved, and she's right. We have no right to interfere in her life, or try to protect her as if she was a child. If James hadn't sent her to us, would we be acting like this? I doubt it. James was so insistent in his letter that we look after her, and out of our affection for him, that's what we've been trying to do. A clumsy effort, as it turns out. Unnecessary and unwanted as well. Dan prowled the office. I didn't see that before. She was always willing to please, tackling every task I gave her with good humour, and at my side whenever I needed her. In that composed, softly spoken girl there's a strong, independent woman. And I never saw it. No, and I don't suppose James did either. She's the perfect secretary. That's her job, and she does it well. Dan nodded. Now the real Grace has been revealed, the gloves are off, and we're in trouble. I don't know how much of our argument she heard, but I think it must have been most of it, and she must have misunderstood. After all, we were only trying to be helpful. She interpreted that as interfering, though. We have some explaining to do. Dan snatched his hat from a chair and put it on. I'll go and find her, now. I'm coming with you. Neither of us is used to explaining ourselves. It might take both of us to get the job done. True, Dan agreed dryly. By the way, George, what did you want to see me about? Just to let you know that James is coming to the Savoy on Saturday. Then we'd better sort this out right now. If James finds out we've upset her, he'll give us hell. George pulled a face. I'll have to see if I can return to active duty as well. It could be safer there. Both officers smiled grimly as they marched out of the office. Dan drove straight to Grace's home, and when he knocked on the door, it was opened by her father. Good evening, Ted. We're sorry to bother you. But we would like to see Grace. May I introduce Colonel Askew?" "Pleased to meet you, sir. I'm afraid she isn't here, Dan." Ted turned and called. "Where did Grace say she was going, Jean?" "To the pictures. The Odeon, I think she said." "Oh, in that case she'll be quite a while. You're both welcome to come in and wait." "Thank you," Dan smiled. "We're in a hurry, so we'll see if we can find her." "We can't wait around all evening," George said, as Dan pulled up near the cinema. "I don't intend to. We'll get the manager to put a message on the screen asking her to come outside." George looked at his nephew in disbelief. "And you think that will put her in a receptive mood, do you? She's already angry enough, Dan." "I'm not leaving it until tomorrow." George shrugged, knowing that when Dan was set on an action, nothing would change his mind. "All right, I'll stand behind you." Dan laughed, and his uncle scowled. "You've been nothing but trouble ever since you were born." "Stop grumbling. Let's find the manager." The two officers were an impressive sight as they marched into the cinema foyer. Grace was startled and alarmed when her name came up on the screen asking for her to come outside immediately. Fortunately, she was only 6 seats in from the aisle and didn't have to disturb too many people as she left. Her heart was thumping as she hurried out. When she saw the two officers waiting for her, she was even more worried. "What's happened?" she asked, rushing up to them. "We need to talk to you about this afternoon," George told her. For a moment, she couldn't quite grasp what he was saying. Then it registered, and she looked from one officer to the other in astonishment. "Are you telling me you had my name put up on the screen just because you want to talk to me?" "Sorry about that, Grace. It was Dan's idea." Her gaze fixed on the Major. This was unbelievable. "You frightened me. I thought the invasion must have begun, or there had been some disaster." "It is a disaster," Dan told her. "We've never had to explain ourselves before, let alone apologise." The sight of these two powerful army officers standing in front of her and looking slightly uneasy was too much for Grace. She fought to hold on to her emotions. "The need to apologise is a disaster." "Absolutely. We've never been in this position before, have we, George? Damned uncomfortable thing to have to do without practice." Grace could contain herself no longer and burst into laughter. They were working as a double act. "This is ridiculous." "Yes, isn't it?" Dan grinned, seeing her sense of humour taking over from anger. "Nevertheless, it must be done. Don't you agree, George?" "Oh, absolutely. We can't have our girl misunderstanding our motives. So, I think we should go to the pub across the road and have a drink." "But you can't go in a pub," Grace declared. "It'll probably be full of soldiers, and having two officers walk in will spoil their evening." "Why?" Dan asked innocently. There was a huge mirror in the foyer, and Grace made them turn round to face it. "You have to ask why? Take a good look at yourselves. In full uniform, you would intimidate anyone." "Do you know what she's talking about, George?" "Not a clue, dear chap." They were enjoying themselves now. Grace was laughing so much she had to find a chair to sit on. "Heaven help this country with you two in charge. You are impossible." "That's the nicest compliment you've ever given me." Dan came and sat beside her. "So, will you come and have a drink with us? After we've finished grovelling, we can be friends again." "How can I refuse such an invitation? And I must admit to being curious to see how you manage such an unfamiliar task." Grace walked between the two men as they crossed the road to the pub, and reflected on what the Major had said about them being friends again. Was that what had grown between them over the last few weeks? Certainly, she would never have spoken to James the way she did with Dan. Although having respect and liking for each other, Grace had never crossed the boundary between boss and secretary. That divide had never really been there with this difficult man. How could it, when he had dragged her round muddy fields, made her hide in ditches, and had even thrown her round a monster of an assault course? Perhaps they had become friends. When they reached the pub, Dan held open a door marked Saloon Bar and winked at her. Yes, friends, she thought. She liked that. They could hear the noise coming from the public bar, but it was quieter in here. "What are you going to have?" Dan asked, ushering her towards a table in the corner.
"A gin with lots of tonic, please."
"Double whiskey for me, if they've got it, of course," George said. Dan soon returned with 2 drinks each. "Saves keeping going to the bar," he explained. There was silence between them for a moment as they all savoured their drinks, and then Dan asked, "Why were you so angry when you heard what we were saying, Grace?"
"You were having a row about me, as if I was some burden you didn't know what to do with. I was offended and hurt. I'm not some helpless female who can't make her own decisions, and it was insulting to hear you in a heated argument about me."
"I apologise for that. It was entirely my fault," Dan explained. "I'm returning to my regiment this Sunday, and George told me I must tell you today. I knew that and have been putting it off. I suppose guilt made me explode. We have become fond of you in the short time you've been with us, and our only desire was to help you. We see now, though, that we had no right to make inquiries about another job without your permission, and for that we both apologise, and ask for your forgiveness." Grace glanced across at the Colonel, who was staring at his nephew as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard.
"He's good, isn't he?"
Grace remarked. "Good gracious!" The Colonel took a swig of whiskey. "I've never heard him be so humble." "Ah, but was I convincing enough?" Dan gave Grace a questioning look.
"You were very eloquent, and I believed you meant every word. Now it's my turn. I knew the job with you was at an end, and I was feeling sad about it. It's been an adventure, and I've enjoyed working with you. I will have happy memories to take away with me. That is why when I found you arguing about what to do with me, I was very hurt. And I reacted badly. I hope you'll also accept my apology for speaking so disrespectfully to both of you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry."
"That's very generous of you, Grace, but you don't need to apologise to us." The Colonel raised his glass. "Here's to friendship." "Friends," Dan said, clinking his glass against Grace's. Chapter 9.
"You look lovely, dear. I've always liked you in that deep blue frock. The colour suits you so well. I'm glad it looks all right, because it's the only suitable frock I've got. I've lost a bit of weight since I last wore it, though."
"Well, that's hardly surprising." Jean studied her daughter with concern. "You've been through a lot, and Dan has had you running around the country." Grace laughed. That was true enough.
"Will you be the only girl there?" her mother asked. "I really don't know, but I expect so. I won't stay long if I am, but I must put in an appearance. Dan's rejoining his regiment tomorrow, so I won't see him again."
"It's a shame you're out of work again so soon. Have you decided what you're going to do?"
"I'm not going to rush into anything," Grace sighed. "I wish Helen was here."
There was a knock on the front door, and Grace picked up a bag.
"That will be the taxi Dan has arranged for me. Give Dan our best wishes, Grace. He's such a nice boy. We really liked him." "I will."
Grace hurried out, smiling. Her mother insisted on calling Dan a boy, and she wondered what he would think about that. When Grace arrived at the Savoy Hotel, she was shown to a private room. There was already quite a crowd there, and she was pleased to see she wasn't the only woman. They were smartly dressed, and all the men were in uniform. It seemed as if almost everyone was in uniform of some kind now. Dan came to her immediately. "You look lovely. I've only ever seen you wearing office clothes or army fatigues. Let me introduce you to everyone. You already know quite a few."
"My goodness," she exclaimed. "This is quite a gathering. I thought there were only going to be a few of us."
"I told them to bring their wives or girlfriends, and I invited a few others." He took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handed one to Grace. "Let's forget the war for a few hours and enjoy our celebration." She nodded, raised her glass to him.
"Thank you for an interesting few weeks, and I wish you all the best, and especially safety as you move into the future. Mum and Dad also send their best wishes on your return to active duty."
"That's kind of them. Thank them for me,
and tell them that I enjoyed meeting them. Dan introduced her to a few she didn't know, and then left to greet more guests just arriving. Grace had been well trained during her years at the lawyer's and moved confidently round the room, talking to different people. Bob was there, and the soldiers from the assault course, and she spent time with them talking and laughing about that day. The Colonel came up to her with a broad smile on his face. "Someone you know has just arrived, Grace." She faced the door, but Dan was blocking her view as he greeted the new arrival enthusiastically, slapping him on the back. When he moved aside, she gasped. The airman standing there was James. He was laughing as the Colonel strode towards him. The affection between the three of them was obvious, and Grace felt a lump in her throat as she watched. Her Brian had been killed, and she shuddered to think what the chances of survival were for these men. She pushed the thoughts aside. All any of them had was this moment, and they could be happy tonight. "Who's that?" Bob asked. "James Meredith. I used to work for him before he joined the Air Force." "He's wearing wings. What does he fly?" "A Spitfire, I believe. He had a pilot's license before he joined up." "Those poor buggers are having a rough time," one of the other soldiers remarked. "They take to the air every day, not knowing if it might be their last time. It's a desperate fight, and if they can't hold off the Luftwaffe, then we'll really be in trouble." "They won't fail," Grace said with confidence. "And before this war's over, we're all going to have to show the same courage as the airmen, soldiers and sailors." She smiled. "This isn't the time for such serious talk, so let's all celebrate together, shall we?" "Too right. Where's that champagne?" Bob called a waiter over, and everyone was smiling again. Grace waited until James saw her, and then she walked towards him, smiling with pleasure. He grasped her hands. "It's good to see you, Grace. How are you?" "I'm fine, and it's lovely to see you. I didn't know you'd be here. How's the Air Force treating you?" "Oh, it's lively. I'm getting in plenty of flying." He laughed and changed the subject. "How did you get on, working with Dan?" "It was different and lively," she added, making them both laugh. "I'll bet it was. He told me he's returning to his regiment tomorrow. So what are your plans now?" "I haven't decided yet, but I might consider joining one of the forces." Grace was surprised when she heard herself say that, as it wasn't high on her list of jobs. Perhaps being surrounded by all these uniforms had prompted the idea. And really, what else could she do? Everyone was being called upon to do something for the war effort. "James," Dan had just arrived. "What would you like to drink?" "No alcohol for me. I'm flying again in the morning." "Right, I'll get you an orange juice." Dan smiled at them and said jokingly, "As you can see, Grace hasn't come to any harm working with me." James watched his friend stride away. "I didn't think I would ever see him walking freely like that again." "He's worked hard to get fit, and I'm pleased for him. He isn't the kind of man you can give a desk job to." "Lord, no. It would have driven him mad. He's got to get back in the fight again." Grace nodded. "Yes, he's got a score to settle." "Did he tell you that?" James asked, giving her a startled look. "He didn't have to. I've watched him fighting frustration and anger. I don't know exactly what happened to him and his men in France, but it won't let him rest. Revenge is a strong word, but I would use it in this case." "I've always known you're good at discerning a person's character, but you've summed up that complex man very accurately. Do you like him?" "Yes, I do," she admitted. "For all his faults, he's easy to like, isn't he?" "We've all got faults. Some are appealing, some are not." "That's very true. Grace, will you keep in touch with George, so he can tell me how you're getting on?" "I'll do that." "Now, if you'll excuse me, there are a few people I must say hello to. Then I must head back. You take care, Grace." "You do the same." She watched him walk away. On the surface, he looked the same, but he had changed. It was hard to pin down because it was well hidden. It didn't take a genius, though, to know that fighting daily to keep the Luftwaffe from dominating our skies was taking its toll on the pilots.
They knew, and so did everyone, that if they failed, Hitler would invade. "Grace, come and have something to eat," Bob urged. "I've never seen so much grub." "I am hungry." She walked with Bob towards the tables laden with food, not allowing her disturbing thoughts to show. Without being obvious, Dan was watching Grace as she moved around the room. "James has trained her well," George said, coming to stand beside his nephew. "See the way she goes to anyone standing on their own, or looking slightly ill at ease?" Dan nodded. They often had nervous or difficult people at the law firm. She's used to putting people at their ease. That was part of her job, and she's still doing it. That efficient businesswoman is always on show, but I've seen that mask slip once or twice. She's got a stubborn streak a mile wide. That's probably what has been holding her together after the death of her husband. Nevertheless, she could be an asset. How is her German?" "Much improved. Keep an eye on her, George. I want to know where she is and what she's doing." "I will, of course. I like the girl, and James has already asked her to stay in touch with me. What are you planning, Dan? And don't give me that innocent look. I know you too well." "I want her to join the army. I took her regularly to an army camp, so she could see what it was like. The idea of enlisting was put to her when she took the driving test, and I made her run the assault course with me. With luck, that might have been enough to plant the seed in her mind. I wouldn't hold out much hope of her doing that. She doesn't like being told what to do with her life, however subtly it's done. She doesn't have to join the forces. With her qualifications, she can find a job anywhere. I know all that, George, but after losing her husband, she wants to do something worthwhile. Her friend, Helen, has already taken that step. And if James hadn't sent her to us, she would already have joined the forces." "Maybe." George sounded doubtful. "She could join another service, though, and you still haven't told me why this matters to you. And I know it does. Is this more than liking on your part for the girl? Don't be ridiculous, Uncle." "There's no point me telling you what is on my mind, because if I don't survive this war, then none of this will matter." "What are you two discussing so seriously?" James wandered up to them, eating a sausage roll. "We were just wondering when you're going to marry that girl of yours," Dan lied. "How long have you been courting her? 3 years?" "2, actually. Getting attached is not a good idea." James looked across the room at Grace. "There are too many widows around already." "Will you both stop this?" George scolded. "You two are going to come through this, we all are. And that's an order." "Yes, sir," Dan and James said in true military style as they snapped to attention. "We never disobey orders, sir," James said, laughing. "Would you mind asking the Germans to stop shooting at us?" "I'll send an official message first thing in the morning. Now, Dan, isn't there anything stronger than this fizzy stuff?" "Tell the waiter what you want and he'll get it for you." James checked his watch. "I'm afraid I must leave. Sorry I couldn't stay longer." "We understand. It was great to see you, and thanks for taking the time to come. We must try to get some leave at the same time." "I'll look forward to that. Cheers, and congratulations on your return to full health, Dan." After a few quick goodbyes to a few people, including Grace, James left. "He's a good pilot, George," Dan said when he saw his uncle's worried expression. "He'll come through this." "Of course he will." George studied his empty glass. "I need a whiskey." It was nearly midnight and the party was showing no sign of breaking up. Grace had stayed longer than she'd meant to and decided it was time to leave. After making sure her taxi was outside, she went over to Dan. "Thank you for a lovely evening. I've enjoyed it very much. But it's time I was on my way. I've said goodbye to everyone except you and Colonel Askew." "It's been a pleasure, Grace," George smiled. "And I hope you're going to keep in touch with me. You know where to find me."
I'll do that, sir. Dan took her arm. I'll walk out to the taxi with you. It was quite cool after the heat of the room, and Grace felt as if she'd had a bit too much champagne. Thank you for the driving lessons. And the fun. Dan smiled down at her. Yes, it was fun, wasn't it? She nodded, suddenly needing to get this goodbye over. It was harder than she'd imagined it would be. She held out her hand. Goodbye, Dan. You take care of yourself. He bent and kissed her cheek. Thank you for looking after me so well. You look after yourself as well, no matter what you do. Goodbye, Grace. When she got in the taxi and it drove away from the hotel, she felt like crying. You've certainly had too much to drink, she told herself sternly. She rested her head back and closed her eyes. What a strange few weeks it had been. Chapter 10. Wake up, you lazy thing. It's 10 o'clock, Grace. Someone was shaking her. Go away. Not a chance. I've only got 48 hours. The familiar voice began to penetrate Gracie's sleepy mind. She opened one eye and then shot upright. Helen, when did you arrive? An hour ago. That must have been some night out. I've never known you to sleep past 7. I drank a bit too much champagne. She reached for the cup of tea on her bedside table and grimaced. I'm so thirsty. Serves you right. You shouldn't have let the soldiers get you drunk. I wasn't drunk, she declared indignantly. A bit light-headed, that's all. Have you come home to lecture me? Would I dare? Helen told her, grinning. Oh, I'm so pleased to see you. I'm not sure what to do next. I don't want to talk about it with you. It always helps to clear my mind. How much leave have you got? I've already told you, 48 hours, so stop wasting it and get out of bed. I'll go and talk to your mum and dad while you get dressed. I'll be ready in no time. Grace swung her legs out of the bed. Ask Mum to make a big pot of tea. Oh, here she is at last, Ted said, as his daughter walked into the kitchen half an hour later. I think she would have slept all morning if you hadn't arrived, Helen. Dan must have thrown a lively party. It was very good, and he'd invited a lot of guests. The champagne kept coming, and you should have seen the food there. Goodness knows what an evening like that must have cost. I don't think he's short of money, dear. Her mother handed her a steaming cup of tea. He has the air of a man used to wealth. Has he? I really don't know anything about him. He never talked about his life outside of the army. Anyway, it was a splendid party, and I was so pleased when James arrived. He only stayed for a short time, but it was good to see him again. Jean shook her head sadly. How was he, Grace? Those poor boys are fighting for their lives, and ours. Did he say anything about that? He was fine, Mum, and no, he never mentioned anything to do with the war. He spent most of his time with Dan and the Colonel. We met Dan, you know, Helen, Jean told her. He brought Grace home one evening, and they were both covered in mud. He came in and had supper with us. Such a nice boy. Grace shook her head and grinned at her friend. He must be around 30. Helen stood up. Come on, we're going out. I want to hear how you got covered in mud. We'd been hiding in ditches. What? Helen stared at Grace and then pushed her out of the door. You've got some explaining to do. It was Grace's turn to stare aghast at the military car parked outside her house. How did that get here? I drove it here. You can drive? I've passed a test as well. Can I have a go? Only if you promise not to dent it. I had to bring an officer to London and I've got to collect him in 2 days. I can keep the car until then, but we can't go far. I must be careful with the petrol. Grace was eagerly inspecting the car. This is nearly the same as the one I learnt in. You didn't tell me you'd had driving lessons. I'm learning all kinds of things, such as... Now, Helen chided. You know you mustn't ask questions. I've signed the Secrets Act. Doesn't make any difference. You might be a spy for all I know. Damn, you've guessed, and I thought I was being so clever about it. Get in the car, Helen laughed. drive to Hyde Park and we'll go for a walk. You can then tell me what on earth you've been up to with this Major of yours." "He isn't mine, Helen. I probably won't ever see him again."
Helen gazed into space for a moment and then said,
"This war is going to be like that. We meet people, wave them goodbye, and they're gone. We've got to accept that, haven't we? It's a sad fact of life now, I'm sorry to say."
Grace started the car and concentrated on driving, thrilled to have the chance. After parking the car, they walked slowly, enjoying the peace and beauty of the park. It was a lovely August day, and a lot of people were about.
"You drive well, Grace." "Thanks. I was taught by the best." "So how are you getting on with whatever it is you're doing?" "I'm enjoying it and meeting a lot of interesting people." "French? Some? You said you wanted to talk."
Grace nodded, knowing the subject of what her friend was doing had been firmly closed. They could no longer share details of their lives, and that was another result of this war.
"I'm thinking about joining the forces, and I wondered if you have any regrets about what you're doing." "None whatsoever."
The reply was instant.
"I wanted to do something that would make a difference, and I think I've found it. I feel useful, Grace, and that means a great deal to me. If you stay a civilian, you could end up in a dead-end job. Is that what you want?" "You know it isn't. Dan tried to get me another job at the War Office, but I'm glad he didn't succeed, because I would have turned it down. I am concerned, though, that I could find myself doing the same work in the forces." "But it's what you're good at. You have a real talent for looking after people. Do you think you made his life easier by being at his side whenever he needed you?" "Well, yes. I suppose I helped him get through a job he hated." "Of course you did. Don't waste your talent, Grace. All you can do is to take that step and see where it leads. If you're given something you don't like, then you can always put in for a transfer. It's time to move forward." "I never thought of that." Grace smiled. "I'm so glad you came home today." "I'll go for it. That's the spirit. Which service are you considering?" "The ATS." Helen laughed. "That sounded positive. Got used to working with army officers, did you?" "As a matter of fact, I did." "In that case, don't settle for anything less than a general," Helen joked. "Now that's decided, I want to know how you're really coping with losing Brian. You're very good at hiding your emotions, but tell me what you're really feeling."
They found a bench and sat down before Grace spoke.
"I was devastated, and it still hurts so badly. Keeping going is helping, though, and while I was working for Dan, there wasn't much time to dwell on it. It was one crazy day after another, and as I watched him fighting to get fit again, I understood his pain, frustration, and anger. They were the emotions I was struggling with, and in a strange way it helped me. The few weeks we worked together were difficult for both of us. Do you know, though, at the end, we laughed with each other, and it felt liberating. When he was ready to leave, he declared us friends, and that was how it felt. I wish I'd met him." "You would have liked him." Grace smiled wistfully. "I needed those few weeks. Now, I'm ready to move on."
The 2 days spent with Helen had been fun. It had been wonderful to be together again, to talk and joke like old times. Those old carefree days were gone, unfortunately. The battle raging in the sky day after day was desperate, and the threat of invasion was still hanging over them. With the enemy now occupying France, it was easy for them to attack shipping. Being an island, it was vital the convoys got through, but the losses were awful. Grace's heart went out to all those Merchant and Royal Navy sailors. The army was building up to strength again after Dunkirk, and the factories were working day and night to turn out the needed armaments. Everyone was doing so much, whatever the cost to themselves, and so must she. Brian would have wanted her to do what she could. The recruitment office was crowded when Grace reached it, and she had to wait an hour for her turn to talk to one of the officers.
"Sit down.
he said, without looking up from the files on his desk. She watched him shuffling through papers and smiled to herself. He was another soldier who didn't want a desk job. Boredom and irritation practically radiated from him. "Right, miss," he said sharply, pushing a form towards her. "Fill that in and sign it." She pushed it back.
"I don't sign anything without knowing what it entails."
He looked up, eyes narrowed. "Then don't waste my time. You came to join the ATS, didn't you?"
"I came to discuss it, but if you're not prepared to do your job properly, then you're wasting my time. I'll see someone who's more civil."
She stood up and started to walk away. "Wait!" He was suddenly in front of her. "I apologise for my rudeness. I'm not having a good day, but that's no excuse. I've been at this for 3 weeks without a break, and my temper's frayed. Can we start again?"
"We'll give it a try."
She sat down again. "What would you like to know, Miss—"
"Mrs. Lincoln."
"Ah, well, if you're married—"
"My husband was killed in France," she said, not giving him a chance to finish what he was saying.
He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "And how do you feel about that?"
"Angry. If you're going to ask me daft questions, then we have nothing else to discuss."
"Humour me, Mrs. Lincoln."
"All right, but you're only allowed one more stupid question."
He laughed, showing interest for the first time. "Do you believe we should be fighting this war?"
"Fighting is the only way we're going to win it, and we must win."
She held his gaze as he studied her intently. "Tell me about yourself." Grace gave him a brief outline of her work at the lawyer's and her qualifications. Before leaving, Dan had given her a sealed envelope to give to any prospective employer. She handed it to the officer.
"This is a reference from my last job."
"And why did you leave that job?"
"Major Chester had recovered enough from his injuries to be able to rejoin his regiment, so my services were no longer required."
His head shot up. "You worked for an officer?"
She nodded. "At the War Office."
He quickly slit open the envelope and read the contents. "Major Chester states that you speak fluent French and good German. You can also drive, having received instruction to Army standards."
"That's correct."
Grace was surprised that Dan had included German, but he had made her work at it, and if he thought it was good enough, then she wasn't going to deny it. He stood up. "Please, wait here, Mrs. Lincoln. I won't be long." Lieutenant Greaves knocked smartly on the door at the end of the passage and stepped inside. "I've got a present for you, Captain," he said, a smile on his face. "You've chosen the right day to come here, sir, and check up on us." Captain Norris sat back and studied the man in front of him. They'd met on the beaches at Dunkirk and had been firm friends ever since. "You look pleased with yourself. I'm hoping this find will be enough to release me from this detail, sir." "Cut out the sir, Jack. There's no one else here. Tell me what this is about. If it's as good as you obviously think, I'll see what I can do about releasing you from interviewing young women, though it's a duty most men would enjoy." "Then give it to one of them. I've had enough." "All right," the captain laughed. "I'll get you back to your beloved tanks. Now, what have you got for me?" "Read that." Jack handed over the letter and waited, watching the captain's expression carefully. After reading it through twice, he looked up. "I met Major Chester briefly once. He was in a bad way, and I'm pleased to know he survived. What is this girl like?" "Bright. Speaks her mind when she needs to and appears to be strong-minded. I have the feeling she would take responsibility and act on her own initiative." "You've deduced all of that in one short interview?" "Ah, well, I wasn't as polite as I should have been, and she told me off, very firmly." "Did she?" The captain was on his feet. "Take me to her." To pass the time while she waited, Grace gazed around the busy room. There were several tables, and the women in the queue went to an empty one when their turn came. Most of the recruitment officers appeared to be polite, making the girls feel welcome. It had been her misfortune to get one who would rather be somewhere else. Her interviewer was returning, and he wasn't alone. She wished she knew what Dan had said in that letter, because it had certainly caused a reaction. She wasn't quite sure if that was good or bad. Mrs. Lincoln, I'm Captain Norris. He sat down at the table. I understand you want to join the ATS. I'm thinking about it. He smiled. Your qualifications are excellent. Major Chester regarded you highly, and I'm sure the service will be pleased to have you, should you decide to join. Could you tell me what kind of work I would be asked to do? That would be decided after you've completed the basic training. I can't make any promises at this point, you understand, but your chances of obtaining a responsible position are good. Grace nodded. She would have liked to know before joining, but that obviously wasn't the way it worked. He smiled again. What is your decision, Mrs. Lincoln? Her hesitation was only a second or two. Where do I sign? Both officers smiled now, and the captain stood up to shake her hand. Lieutenant Greaves will deal with the necessary paperwork. He nodded to the other officer. Bring the papers to me when they're signed. I will attach Major Chester's reference to them and add a few comments of my own. Yes, sir. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Lincoln. Grace watched him walk away, and then sat down again, ready to take this next step. What happens now? She asked, handing the signed form over to the officer. You will receive an official letter telling you where to report. Then, as already mentioned, there'll be the basic training. After that, it will be decided what kind of job you'll be doing. Do I have any say in the matter? His smile was wry. Not a lot, as a rule, but your chances could be better than a lot of the new recruits. The reference from Major Chester will carry weight. I'm sure you'll be all right. We'll see, won't we? She smiled and stood up. And I hope you soon get an assignment more to your liking, Lieutenant. Major Chester hated being tied to a desk as well. The officer laughed. You recognise the signs, but you've made my day more interesting. I've enjoyed meeting you, Mrs. Lincoln, and wish you all the best for the future. Thank you, Lieutenant. Grace headed out of the building, feeling relieved to have finally made the decision. A smile hovered on her lips as she thought about the interview. That was the last time she would be able to speak her mind to an officer. She saw a cafe across the road and headed for it. She needed a strong cup of tea. Chapter 11. A week or so later, the letter arrived telling her to report to a camp in Northamptonshire on the 7th of September. They haven't given you much time, her mother complained. That's tomorrow. I'm glad I haven't had to wait too long. Don't look so worried, Mum. I'll be all right, and I've got to do this. I know, dear, but we'll miss you. I know you and Brian would have moved into a place of your own eventually, but this is different. You'll be alone. No, I won't. There'll be lots of other girls there, and we'll soon get to know each other. Don't fuss, Jean. Ted walked into the kitchen. Grace is more than capable of looking after herself. Anyway, it'll be an adventure, won't it, Grace? It will, she laughed. Don't forget, Mum, that Dan took me to an army camp quite a few times, so I have some idea what to expect. Of course. And talking of Dan, don't forget you promised to let Colonel Askew know what you're doing. I haven't forgotten, Mum. I'll do that today. As soon as breakfast was cleared away, Grace went to the War Office. She no longer had her pass, so she had to wait while they checked to see if the Colonel could see her. She would leave a message for him if he wasn't there. He soon came striding towards her, a wide smile on his face. Grace, how lovely to see you. I'm afraid I can only spare 10 minutes. Phone next time, and we can meet when I'm free. I won't be able to come again. I'm going away. I've come to tell you that I've joined the ATS, and we'll be going to a camp in Northamptonshire tomorrow. Oh, that's splendid. Thank you for letting me know. Perhaps you could find the time to drop me a line now and again. I'd like to know how you get on. I'll do that, sir. He nodded. I miss having you and Dan here. It seems so quiet. I imagine it is, she laughed. May I ask how he's getting on? He's delighted to be back in the fray, you know. He's fit and happy again, thank goodness. I'm pleased to hear it. I mustn't keep you any longer.
Thank you for seeing me, Colonel Askew.
All the best for the future, my dear. The next day, Grace caught the train, excited, but also apprehensive and sad at the same time. She was leaving behind everything that was familiar and heading for a life that was full of uncertainties. Her mother had been tearful at the station, and Grace had tried to explain that this was the right thing for her to do. The house held so many memories of Brian, and the large bed felt empty, knowing he would never be there again. It had been hard to leave her parents, though, but her dad had remained cheerful and positive. That had been a great help. The train was crowded, but after much searching, Grace managed to find a seat. She settled back and gazed out of the window at the passing countryside, not really seeing it. Her mind was now on what awaited her at the end of the journey. That time seemed to come all too soon, and as Grace walked into the camp, she was reminded of the time she'd spent with Dan when he'd been training to get fit again. About 20 girls had arrived on the same train, and most of them were looking worried.
What do we do now?
One of the girls whispered to Grace. We'll soon find out. Our instructions are on the way.
Oh, help!
The girl exclaimed, when she saw the soldier marching towards them.
Now this is actually happening, I'm scared.
You'll be all right, Grace smiled. What's your name?
Peggy.
Pleased to meet you, Peggy. I'm Grace.
You don't look scared.
I'm sure there isn't anything to worry about. If we follow orders, we'll be all right.
Can I stay with you?
Of course. There wasn't time to say anything else, as the procedure of checking them in began. They were issued with uniforms, had a medical, and given a string of instructions. After a long day, they were finally taken to their sleeping quarters.
Oh, no,
Peggy cried in dismay.
This is just a hut, and there are 12 beds in here.
Grace couldn't help laughing at the dismay on some of the faces. Did you expect single rooms?
I didn't know what to expect.
Peggy suddenly grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her towards 2 beds at the far end.
Quick, let's bag these. They're away from the door and it won't be so drafty. This place will be freezing when the weather gets colder.
Good thinking. They made a dive for the beds and sat on them laughing. This propelled the other girls into action, and there was chaos for a while until everyone was settled. Grace stood up and raised her voice above the noise. We haven't had time to get acquainted, so we should all introduce ourselves. I'm Grace Lincoln from Ealing, in London. Each girl introduced herself in the same way, and they were soon talking and laughing with each other. They'd survived the first day, and there was relief all round. Quiet! The chatter stopped abruptly, and all eyes turned to the female officer standing in the doorway. We have just received news that London has been bombed. As many of you come from there, I thought you should know. Grace went cold. They'd been expecting this, of course, but for it to happen on the day she left. She stood up. Thank you for letting us know, Mum. Do you know which areas have been attacked? What's your name? Grace Lincoln, Mum. Well, Lincoln, we believe the main attack has been on the docks. The information coming in isn't detailed yet. I'll let you know when the situation's clearer. Thank you, Mum. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy as we try to turn you into soldiers. There was silence until the officer left, and then one girl said, I hope my folks are all right. There were worried murmurs of agreement. Grace, another girl called, you sounded as if you know what you're doing when you spoke to that officer. I worked for an army major before coming here. I picked up a few tips. Sleep wasn't easy that night, as Grace tossed and turned. She had to find a way to get in touch with her parents quickly. She wouldn't rest until she knew if they were all right. George immediately came to mind. She'd phone him if she could. He wouldn't mind, she was sure. Colonel Askew was so busy, he hadn't had any spare time for a couple of weeks after the first raid on the 7th of September. Somehow, Grace had managed to get hold of a phone the next day and contact him. He had already checked to see if her parents were all right and had been able to put her mind at rest straight away. This was the first opportunity he'd had to see Dan. The moment he walked into the officers' mess at Winchester, he saw him. His height made him easy to spot in a crowd. Hello, George. Dan strode up to him. What brings you here? Thought I'd have a break from London and bombs. I'll have a double whiskey. I ordered it the minute you walked in the door. Initiative, that's what I like to see. An orderly brought the drinks from the bar, and they sat down. You're looking well, George said, after taking a good sip of his drink. How's the leg holding up? Good as new. Dan waited. His uncle didn't just turn up without a good reason. So, Hitler hasn't been able to destroy our air force. He started bombing London. In retaliation to our raid on Berlin, I expect. I was going to phone you, but decided to come instead. I miss you and Grace at the War Office. He took another sip of his whiskey. As I told Grace. Dan's expression didn't change. And what did she say? She laughed. I would have liked to spend more time with her, but I had a meeting to attend. I won't have the chance to see her again, though, because she's gone away. Oh? To get away from the raids? No, of course not. She left before that started. Dan frowned. And you've waited this long before telling me? Where has she gone? Northamptonshire. George looked at his nephew, but couldn't read anything from his expression. How the hell did you know what she would do? George, what are you talking about? Get to the point. End of CD 3.